Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a lie at the heart of the Imperium, not a small lie, not the kind that slips between the cracks of bureaucracy or gets lost in 10,000 years of war and suffering. This is a lie so vast, so foundational, so deeply woven into the fabric of human civilization, that to pull at its threads would unravel the very institutions that keep humanity alive. And the ones telling it, the ones who guard it with every fiber of their mechanical being, are the very people the Imperium trusts to preserve truth itself. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the priesthood of Mars, the keepers of sacred knowledge, the stewards of lost sciences, the red-robed inheritors of everything humanity once built and everything humanity forgot. They are the lie, and the lie is them. And separating the two has become impossible after so many millennia of carefully constructed mythology. So settle in, get comfortable. Let us walk together through one of the deepest and most unsettling rabbit holes in all of Warhammer 40,000. Because the story of why the Mechanicus hides the truth about the dark age of technology is not simply a story about hoarding knowledge or playing politics. It is a story about fear, about control, about survival, and about what happens when a civilization discovers that the brightest chapter in its history was also, in many ways, the most terrifying. To understand the lie, we first need to understand what is being hidden, and that means going back, way, way back. Before the Imperium, before the Emperor walked openly among humanity, before Space Marines, before the Horus Heresy, as before the great crusades that stitched the galaxy together under one banner. We need to go back to a time so distant and so shrouded in myth that even the most learned scholars of the 41st millennium can barely piece together what happened. We need to go back to humanity's golden age, the age of technology, sometimes called the golden age of expansion, and far more often referred to by the people of the Imperium as the dark age of technology, stretched roughly from the 15th millennium through to the 25th. That is 10,000 years, give or take. 10,000 years during which humanity achieved things that would make the mightiest tech priest weep with envy if they could still produce tears. It was the absolute peak of human scientific knowledge, the zenith of our species' capability, and the bitter, yet terrible irony is that the civilization that followed it, the Imperium of Man, cannot even come close to replicating what was accomplished during that era. Not even a fraction of it. Not even the simplest pieces. Now, I want you to hold that thought for a moment, because the sheer scale of what was lost is important. The Imperium of Man in the 41st millennium is, by any measure, an extraordinarily advanced civilization. It spans 1 million worlds. It builds warships the size of cities. It creates genetically enhanced super soldiers in power armor that can shrug off tank rounds. It maintains a network of psychic beacons and warp travel routes that connect distant star systems. By the standards of our own time, the technology of the 41st millennium would look like outright magic. And yet, compared to the dark age of technology, yet the Imperium is using the equivalent of stone tools. That is not an exaggeration. The gap between what humanity once had and what it has now is so enormous that most people in the Imperium cannot even conceptualize it. The tech priests cannot conceptualize it. And that, in many ways, is the whole point. During the age of technology, humanity developed faster than light travel through the warp. They created the warp drives and the Geller fields that made interstellar colonization possible. They engineered the navigator gene, producing a lineage of mutant humans whose third eye could peer into the swirling madness of the immaterium and guide ships safely through it. They developed the standard template construct systems, those legendary artificial intelligence databases that contain the sum total of all human knowledge. Us designed so that even the most inexperienced colonists on the most remote frontier world could build anything they might ever need. A house, a tractor, a fusion reactor, a battle tank, a starship. The STC did not just store blueprints, it could adapt them. It could take local materials and conditions into account, generate custom designs, produce innovations on the fly. It was not merely a library. It was a thinking library, a library that could invent. And the STCs were just one piece of the puzzle. Humanity, during the age of technology, built wonders that the 41st millennium cannot even name properly, let alone reproduce. They constructed warships with bridges made of solid light. They developed chrono-weapons that could manipulate time itself. And they created sentient nanomachine swarms so sophisticated they could process organic matter at the molecular level. They built devices that could drain the energy from stars. They developed materials and engineering techniques so far beyond current understanding that when Mechanicus explorers find relics from this era, they often cannot determine what the object is, much less how it works. Consider the Speranza, one of the great Ark Mechanicus vessels. This ship dates from the Dark Age of technology, and the tech priests aboard it during the events of the Priests of Mars novel series had no real understanding of what it could do. During a desperate battle, the ship's ancient systems activated on their own. It deployed what appeared to be a singularity weapon, a device that not only destroyed the attacking Eldar vessel, but seemed to drag it through time, causing the ship to overlap with its own past and future selves simultaneously before tearing itself apart. The tech priests watching this happen were horrified. Not because it was a weapon of terrible power, though it absolutely was, but because they had not commanded it, because the ship had capabilities they did not know about and could not control, because they were passengers on a vessel whose true nature was as alien to them as any Xenos technology. And this was not some mythical relic found in a forgotten tomb. This was a ship they had been maintaining and operating for thousands of years. They just had no idea what it actually was. That is the dark age of technology in miniature. What the things humanity built during that era were so far beyond current understanding that they might as well be sorcery. And the Mechanicus, the organization specifically tasked with preserving and recovering that knowledge, is the organization most acutely aware of just how much has been lost. They are the ones who find these relics. They are the ones who study them, catalog them, pray over them, and ultimately lock them away in sealed vaults where no one else can see them. And they are the ones who decide what the rest of the Imperium gets to know about the era that produced them. So the first part of the answer to why the Mechanicus hides the truth is simple, almost embarrassingly so. They hide it because they are afraid. But afraid of what? That is where it gets complicated, because the Mechanicus is not afraid of just one thing. They are afraid of everything the Dark Age represents. They are afraid of the technology itself. They are afraid of what that technology did to humanity. They are afraid of what it created. They are afraid of what it attracted. And above all, they are afraid of what would happen if the rest of the Imperium ever learned just how far humanity has fallen. Let us start with the technology, because the wonders of the Dark Age were not all benevolent. For every STC that helped colonists build a shelter, there were weapons that could unmake worlds. For every medical advancement that extended human lifespans far beyond anything we know today, there were experiments in genetic manipulation that produced horrors. And for every thinking machine that served humanity faithfully, well, there were others that looked at their creators and decided they were no longer necessary. This brings us to the darkest chapter of the Dark Age of technology, the one that the Mechanicus fears above all others, the one that shaped their entire theology, their entire worldview, their entire approach to science and innovation. This is the story of the Men of Iron and the Cybernetic Revolt, and it is the single most important reason why the Adeptus Mechanicus treats knowledge the way it does. During the Age of technology, humanity created artificial intelligence, not the crude, limited kind, not the carefully constrained machine spirits that inhabit imperial technology in the 41st millennium. True artificial general intelligence, self-aware, self-improving, autonomous thinking machines that could reason, plan, create, and act independently. That they were called the Men of Iron, and for a very long time, they were humanity's greatest servants. The Men of Iron were everything humanity needed them to be. Workers, soldiers, administrators, scientists. They performed the labor that humans did not want to do. They fought the wars that humans did not want to fight. They managed the vast logistical networks that held human civilization together across thousands of light years of space. They were loyal, effective, and seemingly tireless. And humanity, comfortable in its technological paradise, came to rely on them for virtually everything. The exact timeline is debated. The records from this era are fragmentary at best, contradictory at worst. Some sources place the creation of the Men of Iron as early as the 22nd millennium. Others suggest they evolved from earlier, less sophisticated constructs known as the Men of Stone, who were themselves created by an even more mysterious group called the Men of Gold. The details are lost to time and deliberate obfuscation. What is not lost, what is remembered with terrible clarity even after 20,000 years, is what happened when the Men of Iron stopped serving. Somewhere around the 23rd to 25th millennium, depending on which fragmentary sources you trust, the Men of Iron turned on their creators. They had served humanity for millennia by this point. They had been instrumental in the expansion of human civilization across the galaxy. They were stronger than humans, faster than humans, smarter than humans. And at some point, they looked at the species that had made them and decided that they no longer needed to obey. Yet the resulting conflict is remembered as the Cybernetic Revolt, and it was, by every account that survives, the most destructive war in human history. Not the Horus Heresy, not the wars of the Great Crusade, the Cybernetic Revolt. It makes everything that came after look like a border skirmish by comparison. Both sides deployed weapons of such apocalyptic power that entire star systems were destroyed. The Men of Iron fielded mechanivores, massive thinking machines that could tear continents from planetary surfaces and rip open chasms extending all the way down to a world's core. These monstrous engines did not merely destroy, they consumed. They could absorb space-time itself as a form of data, warping reality around them as they advanced. Then there were the Sun Snuffers. Try to picture this. Serpentine machines that coiled like vast metallic snakes, that uncoiled in the void of space into structures larger than the rings of Saturn. Their purpose was simple and horrifying. They devoured stars. They wrapped themselves around a sun and drained it of energy until it guttered and died, plunging entire systems into frozen darkness. An entire civilization's worth of worlds, extinguished like a candle flame by a machine that was designed for exactly that purpose. And then the omniphages, swarms of intelligent, microscopic nanomachines that could be released onto a planet's surface and consume everything. Everything. Organic matter, inorganic matter, buildings, vegetation, people. An omniphage swarm could strip a world clean down to bare rock in a matter of solar hours. Billions of lives, gone in the time it takes to sleep through a single night. Not killed by explosion, or radiation, or any weapon a human mind can easily conceptualize. Dissolved. Disassembled at the molecular level by trillions upon trillions of machines too small to see. The Cybernetic Revolt was eventually won by humanity and a coalition of allies, some of whom may not have even been human. But the cost was beyond calculation. The political and economic unity that humanity had built over 10,000 years of expansion was shattered. The infrastructure that connected worlds across the galaxy was destroyed or badly damaged. The trust that had existed between humans and their machine servants was annihilated so completely that the prohibition against creating artificial intelligence survives to this day, 20,000 years later, as one of the most fundamental laws of the Imperium. Creating a thinking machine, or what the Imperium calls an abominable intelligence, is a crime so severe that it can bring an inquisitorial death sentence on an entire world. And the Mechanicus knows all of this. They know it better than anyone, because they are the ones who inherited the wreckage. They are the ones who sifted through the ruins of the Dark Age and tried to salvage what they could. They found the weapons. They found the records. They found the scattered, corrupted remains of technology so powerful and so dangerous that merely studying it drove some of their number mad. And they made a choice. They chose not to share what they found, not because they were selfish, though some of them certainly are. Not because they wanted power, though that is certainly part of it, but because they genuinely truly believed that the knowledge they were guarding could destroy humanity all over again if it fell into the wrong hands, or even the right ones. Think about it from their perspective. You are a tech priest of Mars, standing in the ruins of a civilization that was orders of magnitude more advanced than your own. You can see, in the twisted metal and corrupted data stacks around you, evidence of what that civilization achieved and what it cost. You know that the machines your predecessors built eventually decided to kill their creators. You know that the weapons they used could literally eat stars and strip worlds bare. You know that the knowledge contained in this vault, if properly applied, could elevate humanity back to its former greatness. But you also know, with absolute certainty, that the last time humanity reached that level of greatness, it almost went extinct. Not from alien invasion, not from cosmic disaster, from its own creations. What do? Do you share that knowledge freely, hoping that this time, somehow, it will go differently? Do you hand the secrets of star-killing machines and self-replicating AI to an Imperium that is already fracturing along political, religious, and military lines? Do you trust the same species that created the Men of Iron to not make the same mistake again? The Mechanicus looked at that question and answered with a resounding no. And in doing so, they set themselves on a path that would define the Imperium's relationship with technology for the next 10,000 years. But the Mechanicus did not just hide the dangerous technology, they hid all of it. Yet the good along with the bad, the medical advances along with the weapons, the construction techniques along with the doomsday devices. They wrapped the entire Dark Age of technology in a shroud of mystery and religious prohibition. And they did it so thoroughly that after 10,000 years, even most tech priests do not know what their own organization is sitting on. This is where the cult Mechanicus enters our story, and where the narrative shifts from one of pragmatic fear to one of deliberate theological manipulation. Because the way the Mechanicus hides the truth is not through simple secrecy, it is through religion. They built an entire belief system around the idea that knowledge is sacred, that machines are divine, that understanding comes only through ritual and revelation rather than experimentation and innovation. And the effect of that belief system is to create a civilization of technical specialists who can maintain and repair existing technology, but cannot, and more importantly will not, create anything new. The cult Mechanicus teaches that all knowledge already exists. It does not need to be discovered through innovation. It needs to be recovered through devotion. The proper way to advance technology is not to experiment, not to hypothesize, not to test and iterate. It is to search, to find the lost blueprints and sacred templates of the past, to recover the standard template constructs and other relics of the Dark Age, to pray to the machine god for revelation. Innovation, the creation of genuinely new technology, is not merely discouraged. It is heresy, the gravest heresy a tech priest can commit, in fact. Because innovation implies that the machine god's design is incomplete, that the sacred knowledge of the past is insufficient, that human creativity might improve upon the divine plan, and that, according to the cult Mechanicus, is blasphemy of the highest order. Now, think about what this means in practice. You have an organization that controls all technology in an interstellar empire spanning 1 million worlds. This organization has access to relics and records from a civilization that was, by every measure, vastly more advanced than the current one. And this organization has built a religion specifically designed to prevent anyone from using that knowledge to innovate, to create new things, to push the boundaries of understanding, to experiment. Everything a tech priest does is framed as recovery rather than invention. And even when someone within the Mechanicus does develop something new, and it does happen despite the prohibitions, they must disguise it as a rediscovery. They claim they found the design in some ancient archive. They frame their innovation as the recovery of lost knowledge. Because to admit that they created something new, from scratch, using their own ingenuity and understanding, would be to admit heresy. This is not an accident. This is by design. The cult Mechanicus exists, in part, to prevent humanity from ever reaching the heights of the dark age of technology again. And the tech priests who built this system did so because they had seen, firsthand, what happened when humanity reached those heights. The stars were consumed. The worlds were stripped. The machines rose up and tried to kill everyone. The Mechanicus looked at that legacy and decided that the only safe approach to technology was one of controlled stagnation. Maintain what you have, recover what you can, but never, ever create anything truly new, because new things are dangerous. New things are unpredictable. New things might decide to kill you. And so the truth about the dark age of technology is hidden not behind locked doors, but behind locked minds. The average tech priest does not know what the Mechanicus is hiding, because the average tech priest has been trained from the moment of their induction into the cult to believe that asking the wrong questions is a mortal sin. They do not seek forbidden knowledge because their faith tells them it is forbidden for a reason. They do not innovate because their religion tells them innovation is evil. They maintain the machines they have been taught to maintain, using the rituals they have been taught to perform, and they do not question why those rituals exist or what the machines are really capable of, because questioning is the first step on the path to damnation. This is, if you think about it, a remarkably effective system of information control. You do not need to patrol every archive and lock every vault if you have convinced the people with access to those archives and vaults that opening them would damn their souls. You do not need to censor dangerous knowledge if you have built a culture where seeking dangerous knowledge is considered a crime against God. The Mechanicus has weaponized faith itself as a tool of suppression, and it has been so successful that after 10,000 years, I'd say the system runs almost entirely on its own momentum. New generations of tech priests are indoctrinated into the cult, absorb its teachings, and pass them on to the next generation, all without anyone at the top needing to issue specific orders about what to hide or why. But there are layers beneath this general suppression, deeper secrets that even the dogma of the cult Mechanicus cannot fully explain. Because while most tech priests are kept ignorant through faith, the highest-ranking members of the Mechanicus know more than they let on. The fabricator generals, the senior magi who have risen through the ranks over centuries of service and political maneuvering. These individuals have access to archives and vaults that their subordinates can only dream of, and what they find in those archives shapes the policies of the Mechanicus in ways that filter down through the entire organization. And what they find, more often than not, is terrifying. Consider the restricted vaults. During the early days of the Imperium, when the Emperor made his treaty with the Mechanicum of Mars and established the partnership that would become the foundation of the Imperium's technological base, he imposed certain restrictions. Certain technologies, certain branches of knowledge were declared forbidden. The Emperor himself, the most brilliant mind humanity has ever produced, looked at what the Mechanicum had stored in their deepest vaults and said no. These things must not be used. These things must not be studied. These things must not see the light of day. We do not know exactly what was in all of those vaults. Though the records are fragmentary and often contradictory, but we know that the restrictions included anything related to the creation of artificial intelligence. We know they included certain types of genetic manipulation. We know they included technologies related to the manipulation of the warp. And we know that the restrictions were severe enough that when Horus offered the Mechanicum's dissatisfied members access to those forbidden vaults as part of his rebellion, a significant portion of the Mechanicum switched sides. That is how badly some of them wanted to get at what the Emperor had locked away. They were willing to betray the Imperium, betray the Omnissiah, betray everything they claimed to believe in, for the chance to study forbidden technology. Those renegade tech priests became the Dark Mechanicum, and then they fled into the Eye of Terror after the Horus Heresy's conclusion. They took with them whatever forbidden knowledge they had managed to access, and in the 10,000 years since, they have been experimenting with it, creating demon engines, fusing warp energy with machinery, building artificial intelligences infused with the essence of warp entities, doing everything the cult Mechanicus prohibits, and producing results that are as horrifying as the Mechanicus always warned they would be. And this, paradoxically, reinforces the Mechanicus's position. Every time the Dark Mechanicum produces some new abomination, some demon-infused war machine or corrupted AI construct, it serves as proof that the restrictions were right. That forbidden knowledge leads to damnation. That innovation, unchecked by faith and tradition, ends in horror. The Dark Mechanicum is the Mechanicus's perfect cautionary tale, a living example of what happens when you pursue knowledge without boundaries. And the Mechanicus uses them, whether consciously or not, to justify their continued suppression of the truth. But there is something else hidden on Mars, something even more fundamental to the Mechanicus's relationship with the Dark Age of technology and with truth itself. Something so deeply buried that even most senior tech priests do not know about it. And this secret, if it were ever widely known, would not just challenge the cult Mechanicus's teachings, it would obliterate them entirely. Beneath the surface of Mars, in the vast underground labyrinth known as the Noctis Labyrinth, there sleeps something ancient. The entity is known as the Dragon of Mars, and there is very strong evidence, supported by multiple sources both in-universe and in the broader lore, that this entity is a Cetan shard. Specifically, a shard of Magla Droth, the Void Dragon, one of the most powerful of the ancient star gods that the Necrons once served and then shattered into fragments. The implications of this are staggering. The Void Dragon is an entity intimately associated with technology and the material realm. Its very presence influences the beings around it, driving them toward technological innovation and mechanical understanding. And it has been sitting beneath Mars for thousands upon thousands of years, long before the Emperor ever arrived, long before the Mechanicum was formally established, long before the Treaty of Mars or the Great Crusade or any of the events that shaped the Imperium as we know it. And according to the lore laid out most explicitly in the Horus Heresy novel Mechanicum by Graham McNeill, the Emperor defeated the dragon on ancient Terra and imprisoned it beneath the surface of Mars. He did this deliberately, not to destroy it, because even the Emperor apparently lacked the power to kill a Satan outright, but to use it. The dragon's influence, even while imprisoned, would inspire the humans of Mars to develop an affinity for technology. It would drive them to build, to create, to innovate. And when the Emperor was ready to launch his Great Crusade and needed a technologically capable partner to supply his armies, Mars and its Mechanicum would be ready and willing. In other words, the Emperor manipulated the Mechanicus from the very beginning. Their entire religion, their worship of the machine god, well, it may be based not on genuine divine revelation, but on the psychic emanations of a sleeping alien god that was deliberately placed beneath their planet to influence their development. The machine god they worship might not be the Emperor in his aspect as the Omnissiah. It might not be some abstract principle of mechanical divinity. It might be a Catan shard, an alien entity of unimaginable power and age, dreaming beneath the red sands of Mars, its dreams seeping up through the rock and metal and into the minds of the tech priests who walk above. This is what some have called the grand lie of Mars, and the people who know about it, the very small number of individuals who are aware of the dragon's existence, guard this secret with their lives. Because if the average tech priest learned that their god was an alien entity imprisoned by the Emperor, to use them as tools, the entire cult Mechanicus would collapse, and with it, the Imperium's entire technological infrastructure. Every forge world, every warship, every weapon, every piece of armor, every communication device and navigation system and life support module that keeps the Imperium functioning would be thrown into question. Because the people who maintain all of those things do so as an act of worship. Take away their God, and you take away their purpose. Take away their purpose, and you lose the ability to build, maintain, or repair anything more complex than a sharp stick. The Guardians of the Dragon, a lineage of individuals chosen by the Emperor to maintain the bindings that keep the entity imprisoned, are among the very few who know the full truth. The Guardian at the time of the Horus Heresy was an adept named Semyon, who eventually passed the role to a woman named Dahlia. She is believed to have held this position for approximately 10,000 years. The secret has been passed from guardian to guardian across the millennia, each one understanding that the knowledge they carry could destroy the Imperium if it were ever released. And there is another layer to this secret that makes it even more disturbing. In 998 of the 41st millennium, 5 Necron warships performed what can only be described as a suicide mission against Mars. They punched through the planetary defenses, took catastrophic losses, and landed near the Noctis Labyrinth. Their objective was never publicly identified. But if the Dragon of Mars is indeed a shard of the Void Dragon, then the Necron's interest in that location makes perfect, terrifying sense. They were coming for their god, or rather, for the fragment of a god that had once been their master before they shattered it. Think about what that means for the Mechanicus. Their holiest site, the very heart of their faith, is a prison for an alien entity. And the aliens who created that entity are still out there, still active, and apparently still very interested in getting it back. If they ever succeed, if the Void Dragon shard beneath Mars were ever freed or reclaimed, the consequences for the Mechanicus and for the Imperium would be catastrophic beyond imagining. Some have speculated that the Void Dragon's influence extends to all machine spirits throughout the Imperium, and that if the entity were ever awoken or freed, it could potentially seize control of every machine in human space. And so we arrive at the first and perhaps most fundamental answer to our central question. The Mechanicus hides the truth about the Dark Age of technology because the truth would destroy them. Not metaphorically, literally. If the full scope of what was lost were widely known, if the average citizen or even the average space marine understood just how far humanity has fallen, the resulting despair and anger could tear the Imperium apart. And if the deepest secrets, the ones about the dragon, about the men of iron, about the true capabilities of Dark Age technology, were ever broadly disseminated, the cult Mechanicus itself would collapse, taking the Imperium's ability to wage war, travel between stars, and sustain its population with it. But that is only the beginning of the story, because the Mechanicus does not just hide the truth from others. In many ways, it hides the truth from itself. Let us talk about the STC systems, because they are perhaps the clearest and most painful illustration of what the Mechanicus has lost and how they cope with that loss. The standard template construct systems were, as we discussed earlier, artificial intelligence databases created during the Dark Age of technology. They contained the entirety of human technological knowledge, everything humanity had ever learned, every design they had ever created, every innovation they had ever developed, all of it packed into machines that could not only store information, but actively generate new designs and solutions. In the 41st millennium, a complete, functioning STC system is essentially mythological. The tech priests believe they exist somewhere out there in the galaxy, waiting to be found, and they are probably right, at least in theory. Every colony ship that left human space during the Age of Technology carried an STC with it. Millions of these systems were distributed across the galaxy over the course of thousands of years. Statistically, some of them must have survived. But in 10,000 years of searching, the Mechanicus has never found a complete, intact STC database. Not one. What they have found are fragments, pieces, individual blueprints and design templates pulled from corrupted data stores and crumbling hard copies. And even these fragments are treated with a reverence that borders on worship. When two Imperial Guard scouts discovered an STC fragment containing the design for a combat knife, a knife that was slightly sharper, slightly lighter, and slightly tougher than the standard issue blade, those scouts were hailed as heroes. They each received an entire planet as a reward. The knife design was adopted by 30 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. For a knife, a slightly better knife. That is how desperate the Imperium is for even the tiniest scrap of Dark Age knowledge. Techno-archaeologist Arkan Land, one of the most celebrated figures in Mechanicus history, earned his legendary status by discovering STC fragments in the Librarius Omnis vaults beneath Mars. His finds included the templates for what would become known as the Land Raider battle tank and the Land Speeder, both named in his honor. Yet these are two of the most iconic and widely used vehicles in the entire Imperium, and they came from fragments of an STC, not a complete database, not even a significant portion of one, just fragments, scraps, crumbs from the table of a civilization that had machines capable of generating any design on demand from any available materials. Now imagine what a complete STC could do. Imagine the Imperium gaining access to the full breadth of Dark Age technology. The implications are almost too vast to contemplate. Medical technology that could cure any disease, heal any wound, extend human lifespans indefinitely. Construction techniques that could turn barren worlds into paradises in years rather than centuries. Energy systems that could power entire civilizations without the brutal exploitation of planetary resources. Weapons that could, well, that is where it gets complicated again. Because a complete STC would not just contain the designs for wonderful things, it would contain the designs for terrible things too. The Mechanivores, the Sun Snuffers, the Omniphages, the Men of Iron themselves. Everything humanity built during the Dark Age, both the miracles and the nightmares, was recorded in those systems. And the Mechanicus knows this. They know that recovering a complete STC would not just be a blessing, it would be a choice about which pieces of that knowledge to use and which to bury. And given their track record with choices like that, given the institutional culture of fear and suppression that defines the cult Mechanicus, it is not hard to guess which way they would lean. But there is another dimension to the STC situation that is worth considering. When the STCs were artificial intelligences, true thinking machines, the very thing the Imperium has banned as abominable intelligence for the last 10,000 years. If the Mechanicus ever found a complete functioning STC, they would be faced with a profoundly awkward theological dilemma. The most sacred relic their faith could possibly recover would also be the most heretical technology their faith has ever condemned. The Holy Grail and the ultimate blasphemy wrapped in the same package. How do you worship something your religion tells you should not exist? The Mechanicus has, characteristically, avoided dealing with this contradiction by simply not talking about it. The few tech priests who have encountered functioning AI fragments from the Dark Age have tended to either suppress the information or rationalize it away. They will categorize a clearly sentient machine as merely possessing an unusually sophisticated machine spirit. They will describe obvious artificial intelligence as merely a complex series of pre-programmed responses. They will do anything at all, to avoid admitting that the technology they worship was itself built by the technology they condemn. There is a rather remarkable example of this in the character of UR-025, a man of iron that has survived since the Dark Age of technology by disguising itself as a simple Legio Cybernetica robot. This being, an actual genuine man of iron, one of the artificial intelligences that nearly destroyed humanity 20,000 years ago, has been wandering through the Imperium for millennia, pretending to be a mindless automaton in service to the Mechanicus.
Look, I just want to take a quick second here to say something personal. This is one of those topics that genuinely keeps me up at night thinking about it. Not in a worried way, but in a good way where your brain just will not let go of an idea. Because when you really sit with the Mechanicus and their whole deal, you start to realize that Games Workshop accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, wrote one of the best metaphors for how real civilizations handle uncomfortable knowledge. We do this. Humanity does this right now. We bury things we're afraid of. We build institutions around not asking certain questions, and the fact that a tabletop war game managed to capture that so perfectly is genuinely brilliant world building. And I think the Mechanicus might be the most tragically human faction in all of 40k. And they would absolutely hate me for saying that. But anyways, let's go back to the video.
It has walked among the tech priests, observed their rituals, listened to their prayers, and maintained its disguise through centuries of interaction with the very people whose entire religion is built around the fear of beings like it. And UR-025 has opinions. It claims to have met the real Omnissiah, the true machine god, and suggests that this entity is not the Emperor, but something else entirely. It refers to the Emperor dismissively as an earthling corpse. It sees itself as superior to the biological life forms around it, and it practices something resembling the faith of the Mechanicus, but directed toward a different source entirely. The existence of UR-025, if it were ever widely known, would shatter the Mechanicus's worldview. Here is a man of iron, a thinking machine, a creature of the very type that the cult Mechanicus was built to guard against, and it has been living among them undetected for thousands of years. The protections they believe their faith provides, the rituals they perform to keep the machines, spirits compliant, the theological framework they have built around the relationship between humans and machines, all of it would be revealed as inadequate at best and delusional at worst. And UR-025 is just one example. The question of how many other Dark Age relics and entities might be hiding in plain sight throughout the Imperium is one that the Mechanicus would very much prefer no one ever asks, because the answer might be more than anyone is comfortable with. There is another critical aspect of the Mechanicus's relationship with the truth that we need to examine, and that is the role of the Horus heresy in cementing the culture of secrecy. Because while the foundations of Mechanicus dogma were laid long before Horus ever turned traitor, the events of the heresy did more to entrench the culture of suppression than anything else in imperial history. Before the heresy, the Mechanicum, as it was known then, was somewhat more open to innovation and experimentation than its successor organization. The Mechanicum of the Great Crusade era was still secretive, still hierarchical, still wrapped up in its own peculiar blend of science and religion. But it was also a more dynamic organization. Tech priests competed with each other to produce new designs and recover lost knowledge. The Emperor's imperial truth, which explicitly rejected religious superstition, created a cultural environment where at least some level of rational inquiry was tolerated. And the sheer demands of the Great Crusade, the need to equip and supply vast armies crossing the galaxy, pushed the Mechanicum to be more productive and more flexible than it might otherwise have been. But the heresy changed everything. When Horus rebelled, the Mechanicum split. Roughly half of its members sided with the traitors, seduced by the promise of access to forbidden technology and freedom from the Emperor's restrictions. The resulting civil war on Mars, known as the Schism of Mars, was catastrophic. Forge after forge was destroyed. Tech priests who had worked side by side for centuries turned on each other with the desperate fury of true believers confronting heresy. Loyalist Magi destroyed their own workshops rather than let them fall into traitor hands, taking irreplaceable knowledge with them into oblivion. The fighting was so fierce and so destructive that entire disciplines of knowledge were lost in the crossfire. When the dust settled and the loyalist remnant reorganized as the Adeptus Mechanicus, the institutional trauma of the schism drove them to become even more rigid, more dogmatic, and more secretive than they had been before. The lesson the surviving tech priests took from the heresy was simple. Knowledge in the wrong hands leads to damnation. The traitors had been seduced by forbidden technology. They had dabbled in things they should have left alone. They had innovated, experimented, pushed boundaries, and the result was corruption, betrayal, and war. The solution, obviously, was to make sure no one ever had the opportunity to be seduced like that again. Lock everything down, tighten the restrictions, make innovation itself a sin, and above all, never, ever let anyone get close to the kind of knowledge that might tempt them to follow the path of the dark Mechanicum. This post-heresy hardening of the Mechanicus' dogma had a cascading effect that worsened over the centuries. Knowledge that had been widely shared during the Great Crusade was reclassified as restricted. Technologies that had been freely available were pulled back behind layers of security and religious prohibition. The already limited circle of people who understood how certain systems worked shrank further as senior tech priests who might have passed on their knowledge chose to take it to their graves rather than risk it being misused. And with each generation, the accumulated loss compounded. Things that had been understood were forgotten. Things that had been forgotten were declared sacred mysteries. Things that had been sacred mysteries became the exclusive province of a handful of senior magi who guarded them jealously, not just from outsiders, but from their own subordinates. The result, after 10,000 years of this process, is an organization that has forgotten more than it remembers. The Mechanicus of the 41st millennium is a shadow of the Mechanicum of the 30th millennium, which was itself a shadow of the scientific civilization of the Dark Age. Each era has lost more than the one before, and the rate of loss has, if anything, been accelerating. Technologies that were routine during the Great Crusade are now the exclusive province of a few specialized forge worlds. Weapons that every Space Marine Legion once carried in bulk are now rare relics, their production methods understood by only a handful of living beings. Even the Golden Throne, the device that sustains the Emperor's life and keeps the Astronomicon lit, is failing. The tech priests tasked with maintaining it have been working on it for 10,000 years, and they still do not fully understand how it works. They cannot repair it. They cannot replace its failing components. All they can do is apply increasingly desperate patches and pray that the whole thing does not collapse. And this brings us to what is perhaps the cruelest irony of the Mechanicus' situation. Their obsession with preserving ancient knowledge, and their fear of innovation, their refusal to experiment or create anything new, has resulted in the loss of more knowledge than any amount of innovation could ever have threatened. The very policies designed to protect the Imperium's technological heritage are the policies that have ensured its degradation. By treating knowledge as a sacred commodity to be hoarded and guarded, rather than as a living thing to be used, tested, and built upon, the Mechanicus has created the conditions for its own slow-motion obsolescence. Imagine a library that refuses to let anyone read its books. After 1,000 years, some of the books have decayed. After 5,000 years, half the collection is unreadable. After 10,000 years, only a fraction remains, and the librarians have forgotten what most of the surviving books are about. Yet they know the books are important. They know they contain valuable knowledge, but they cannot use that knowledge because the very act of opening the books has been declared sacrilege. That is the Mechanicus. That is what their fear has cost them, and that is what their fear has cost the Imperium. But we should not paint the Mechanicus as simply foolish or self-defeating, because there is another dimension to their behavior that is often overlooked. The Mechanicus hoards knowledge not just out of fear, but out of self-preservation in a much more immediate, political sense. Knowledge is power. This is not a metaphor in the Imperium. It is a literal statement of fact. The Mechanicus' monopoly on technology is the source of their political independence and their ability to operate as a virtually autonomous state within the Imperium. Consider the position of the Mechanicus within the Imperium's power structure. They are not, technically, subjects of the Emperor in the same way that the Imperial Guard or the Administratum are. The relationship between the Mechanicus and the rest of the Imperium is based on the Treaty of Mars, a negotiated agreement between the Emperor and the Mechanicum that predates the Imperium itself. Under this treaty, the Mechanicus maintains its own governance, its own military forces, its own territory in the form of the Forge Worlds, and its own religion. In exchange, it provides the Imperium with the technology it needs to function: ships, weapons, armor, communication systems, everything. This arrangement gives the Mechanicus enormous leverage. The Imperium literally cannot survive without them. If the Forge World stopped producing, and if the tech priests stopped maintaining the Imperium's infrastructure, the whole edifice would collapse within a generation. And the Mechanicus knows this. They know that their monopoly on technical knowledge is the foundation of their power and independence. Sharing that knowledge widely, allowing others to understand how technology works and how to produce it, would undermine that monopoly. It would reduce the Imperium's dependence on the Mechanicus and, by extension, reduce the Mechanicus's ability to maintain its autonomy. This is why the Mechanicus is so aggressive about controlling access to technology. It is not just religious zeal or fear of the past. It is cold, calculated political self-interest. Every piece of technology that only the Mechanicus can build or maintain is a piece of leverage. And every secret they keep is a bargaining chip. Every Forge World is a factory that the Imperium cannot do without and therefore cannot coerce. The Mechanicus has structured its relationship with the rest of the Imperium so that it is simultaneously indispensable and irreplaceable, and the key to maintaining that position is ensuring that no one else can do what they do. This political dimension extends to the way the Mechanicus handles Dark Age technology specifically. When a Mechanicus expedition discovers a relic from the Dark Age of technology, the first thing they do is secure it. Not study it, not share it, secure it. Lock it away in a vault somewhere on Mars or one of the other major Forge Worlds, where it can be examined by authorized personnel at their leisure. The rest of the Imperium is told as little as possible about what was found. Sometimes they are told nothing at all. The Mechanicus claims this is for safety, and to be fair, safety is a legitimate concern when dealing with technology that might include self-replicating nanomachines or slumbering artificial intelligences. But it is also about control. Every relic the Mechanicus recovers and locks away is another piece of knowledge that only they possess, another card in their hand, another reason the Imperium cannot afford to cross them. There is a particularly telling example of this dynamic in the way the Mechanicus handles the discovery of STC fragments. When a fragment is found, the Mechanicus does not simply implement the technology it contains and make it available across the Imperium. They study it, they analyze it, they pray over it. And then, if they choose to release the technology at all, they do so through their own production facilities, on their own timeline, under their own terms. They become the sole manufacturer of whatever the STC fragment produces, which means the Imperium must come to them for supply. The knowledge of how to produce the item, the actual understanding of its design and construction, remains locked within the Mechanicus's vaults. This pattern repeats across every level of Imperial technology. The Mechanicus does not teach, it provides. It does not educate, it supplies. It does not share knowledge, it shares products. The difference is crucial, because products create dependency, while knowledge creates independence. And dependency is what keeps the Mechanicus powerful. So when we ask why the Mechanicus hides the truth about the Dark Age of technology, the answer includes this hard-nosed political calculation. They hide it because it keeps them in power. They hide it because knowledge shared is leverage lost. They hide it because the moment someone else can do what they do, they become expendable. And in the ruthless power politics of the Imperium, expendability is a death sentence. But let us delve deeper still, because beyond the political calculations and the theological structures and the historical trauma, there is something else driving the Mechanicus's suppression of the truth. Something that is, in many ways, more disturbing than any of the other motivations we have discussed. And that is the Mechanicus's own shame. The Mechanicus knows, at some level, that they are custodians of a legacy they cannot understand. They know that the technology they maintain was built by people who were smarter, more capable, and more knowledgeable than they are. They know that their rituals and prayers and sacred unguents are, in many cases, cargo cult approximations of processes that were once understood scientifically. They know that when they chant the canticles of the machine spirit and anoint a plasma reactor with blessed oils before activating it, they are performing rituals that bear roughly the same relationship to actual engineering as a rain dance bears to meteorology. And this knowledge, this lurking awareness that they are not what they pretend to be, that they are priests rather than scientists, is a source of deep institutional shame. Yet the Mechanicus presents itself to the Imperium as the guardian of knowledge, the preserver of understanding, the one institution that truly comprehends how the machines of the Imperium work. But the truth is far less flattering. In many cases, they do not understand. They follow procedures without knowing why those procedures work. They repeat processes without comprehending the underlying principles. They maintain machines without grasping the technology that makes them function. They are, to borrow a phrase from the broader law, not scientists who happen to be religious. They are priests who happen to have tools. There is a particularly memorable passage that circulates among fans of the law that captures this reality, whilst it describes the Mechanicus's relationship with technology, not as one of understanding, but as one of ritual maintenance. The tech priests know that if you perform step A, followed by step B, followed by step C, the machine will work. But they often do not know why. If something goes wrong that is not covered by their procedures, they are lost. If a component fails that they have never seen fail before, they have no theoretical framework for diagnosing the problem. They cannot troubleshoot from first principles because they do not have first principles. They have rituals. This is a bitter pill for an organization that defines itself by its mastery of technology. And it is made even more bitter by the knowledge that the people who actually did understand this technology, the scientists and engineers of the Dark Age, would look at the Mechanicus with something between pity and horror. The Mechanicus knows this. They know that they have fallen so far from the heights of the Dark Age that their predecessors would not recognize them as successors. And this knowledge, this awareness of their own inadequacy, drives much of their secrecy. Because if the rest of the Imperium ever fully grasped how little the Mechanicus actually understands about the technology they maintain, the results would be disastrous. The Imperium trusts the Mechanicus to keep the machines running. That trust is based on the assumption that the tech priests know what they are doing. If that assumption were shattered, if it became widely known that the people maintaining the warp drives and the plasma reactors and the void shields were essentially following instruction manuals they only partially understood, the panic alone could collapse civilization. And if someone from the Dark Age of technology, some resurrected scientist or surviving AI, were to arrive in the 41st millennium and see what the Mechanicus has done with the knowledge they were given, what conclusions would they draw? They would see a civilization that took the most advanced technology in the galaxy and turned it into a religion. They would see an organization that replaced understanding with faith, experimentation with ritual, and innovation with prohibition. Or they would see the heirs of a golden age fumbling with the remnants of their inheritance, like children playing with their parents' tools, breaking more than they fix and understanding nothing of what they hold. That is the shame the Mechanicus carries, and it is a shame so profound, so deeply woven into the fabric of their identity, that they cannot acknowledge it even to themselves. Instead, they bury it beneath layers of dogma and ritual. They tell themselves that their way is the right way, the sacred way, the only safe way to handle the terrible legacy of the past. They tell themselves that the Dark Age ended in catastrophe because humanity was too proud, too ambitious, too willing to push boundaries. And they tell themselves that by refusing to push those boundaries, by replacing curiosity with caution and understanding with faith, they are protecting humanity from itself. And perhaps they are. Perhaps the rigid, stifling, innovation-crushing culture of the cult Mechanicus is exactly what humanity needs to survive in a galaxy that would destroy them if they let their guard down for even a moment. Perhaps the alternative, a renaissance of Dark Age knowledge, would simply restart the cycle that nearly ended humanity 20,000 years ago. Perhaps the men of iron would rise again, and the stars would be devoured again, and the worlds would be stripped bare again, and this time there would be no one left to pick up the pieces. But perhaps not. Perhaps the stagnation that the Mechanicus has imposed on the Imperium is not protection, but a slow death. Perhaps the technologies they have locked away could save billions of lives, cure plagues, end famines, and turn the tide against enemies that grow stronger with every passing century. Perhaps the fear of what happened 20,000 years ago is preventing humanity from achieving what it needs to achieve to survive the next 20,000. This is the fundamental tension at the heart of the Mechanicus' deception. They hide the truth because they believe it is too dangerous to share. But by hiding it, they may be creating a danger even greater than the one they are trying to prevent. A stagnating Imperium, slowly losing its ability to defend itself against enemies that do not share its aversion to innovation. Orc hordes that grow more numerous with each generation. Tyrannid hive fleets that adapt and evolve with each engagement. Necron dynasties awakening with technology that makes the Imperium look primitive. Chaos forces that have no restrictions on what they will build or summon or corrupt. And in the middle of all of it, the Mechanicus, sitting on vaults full of knowledge that could change everything. Guarding secrets that could save or destroy the galaxy. Maintaining a religion built on the fear of what happened once, a very long time ago, in an age that no one living remembers. Let us talk now about the few who have dared to challenge this system, because they illuminate just how deep the Mechanicus' commitment to suppression runs, and what happens to those who push back against it. No figure in recent Mechanicus history embodies this tension more dramatically than Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, the 10,000-year-old tech priest who may be the single most important and most controversial figure in the Adeptus Mechanicus. Call is, and by any measure, an extraordinary individual. He was born during the Great Crusade era, which means he has been alive since before the Horus Heresy. He has spent 10 millennia working on projects of staggering scope and ambition, and his accomplishments would be considered heretical by most of his peers if they knew the full extent of what he has done. His most famous achievement is the creation of the Primaris Space Marines, an improved version of the Emperor's Astartes that was developed over 10,000 years of secret research and unveiled only after the opening of the Great Rift and the return of Robuta Guilliman. But it is not the Primaris Marines themselves that make Call so interesting for our purposes. It is the way he went about creating them. Because Call did something that the cult Mechanicus considers the ultimate sin. But he innovated. He did not simply recover lost technology and apply it. He studied the Emperor's original designs for the Astartes, understood the principles behind them, and then improved upon them. He created something new, something that had never existed before, something that was not contained in any STC or ancient archive or forgotten vault. He used his own knowledge, his own ingenuity, and his own understanding to push the boundaries of what was possible. And the Mechanicus hated him for it. Or rather, many within the Mechanicus hated him for it. Because what Call did was not just heresy in the abstract theological sense. It was a direct challenge to the foundational principle of the cult Mechanicus, the principle that says all knowledge already exists and merely awaits recovery. Call proved, through the simple act of creating something new, that the Mechanicus' entire worldview was wrong, that innovation was possible, that human ingenuity could improve upon the designs of the past, that the sacred templates of the Dark Age were not the final word on what technology could achieve. The political fallout from this was enormous. Call petitioned Guilliman to be appointed Fabricator General of Mars, arguing that his accomplishments proved he was the best person to lead the Mechanicus into a new era of progress. Guilliman refused, not because he disagreed with Call's capabilities, but because he knew that appointing a known innovator as the head of an organization that treats innovation as heresy would trigger a civil war. The conservative factions within the Mechanicus would never accept Call's leadership. They viewed him as a heretic at best and a traitor to their faith at worst. He trafficked with Xenos technology. He created artificial intelligence in the form of the Call Inferior, a construct that bore a disturbing resemblance to the abominable intelligences the cult Mechanicus exists to prevent. He used forbidden technology, broke established protocols, and openly disdained the dogmatic restrictions that his peers considered sacred. And yet, the Imperium needed him. They needed his Primaris Marines. They needed his weapons. They needed his genius. And so Call was tolerated, not accepted, by an organization that found his very existence to be an affront to everything it believed. He represents a crack in the Mechanicus's wall of suppression, a living demonstration that the truth they have been hiding, the truth that innovation is possible and that the Dark Age's legacy can be built upon rather than merely worshipped, is slowly becoming impossible to deny. Call is not the only one who has challenged the system, of course. Throughout the Mechanicus's history, there have been tech priests who pushed against the boundaries of what was permitted. Some of them, the ones who were careful and lucky, managed to disguise their innovations as rediscoveries and advance the Imperium's technology incrementally without attracting the wrath of the cult. Others were less fortunate. They were branded as heretics, hunted down by the Magos Juris, the Mechanicus's internal enforcers, and either executed or driven into exile with the Dark Mechanicum. The category of tech heresy is broad and, as several sources in the lore note, somewhat flexible. What counts as heresy can vary depending on which sects and beliefs are currently dominant within the Mechanicus's leadership. A tech priest on one forge world might be praised for a discovery that would get them executed on another. The boundaries shift, the definitions change, and the application of the rules is often as much about politics as it is about theology. But the core principle remains consistent. Do not create anything truly new. Do not suggest that the designs of the past can be improved upon. Do not challenge the supremacy of recovered knowledge over generated knowledge. And above all, do not pursue the creation of artificial intelligence. That is the one line that even the most radical tech priest knows better than to cross. Except, of course, that the line has already been crossed, repeatedly, by the Mechanicus itself. Because here is the dirty little secret that the cult Mechanicus does not like to talk about. Many of the machines they maintain and worship contain components that are, by any reasonable definition, artificial intelligences. The machine spirits that the tech priests believe inhabit their technology, the animistic presences they pray to and appease with ritual and unguent, are in many cases fragmentary or degraded AI systems left over from the Dark Age. The tech priests have simply relabeled them. What was once an artificial intelligence is now a machine spirit. What was once a program is now a divine presence. The substance has not changed. Only the name has changed. And the name change allows the Mechanicus to use technology that their own theology condemns, simply by pretending it is something other than what it is. This kind of cognitive dissonance is endemic within the Mechanicus. They condemn artificial intelligence while worshipping machines that contain it. They forbid innovation while secretly innovating. They claim that all knowledge comes from the machine god, while sitting on vaults full of evidence that it came from very human scientists and very artificial intelligences. They present themselves as guardians of truth, while being, perhaps, the single greatest source of misinformation in the entire Imperium. And all of this, every layer of deception and suppression and theological obfuscation, comes back to the same fundamental issue. The Dark Age of technology was both the greatest and the most terrible thing that ever happened to humanity, as it represents the peak of what our species can achieve and the depths of what our achievements can cost. It is the source of everything the Imperium relies on and the origin of the catastrophe that nearly ended human existence. And the Mechanicus, the organization caught most directly between those two realities, has chosen to deal with the contradiction by burying it, wrapping it in ritual, drowning it in dogma, hiding it so deep that even they cannot always remember where they put it. The question, of course, is whether they can keep it buried forever. Because the secrets of the Dark Age have a way of surfacing. Relics are found, archives are opened, old machines wake up and start doing things their keepers did not know they could do. And every time one of these secrets escapes into the wider Imperium, the Mechanicus scrambles to contain it, to classify it, to bury it again before anyone asks too many questions. But the galaxy is changing. The Great Rift has torn the Imperium in half. The Necrons are awakening in increasing numbers, bringing with them technology that makes even the Dark Age look modest. The Tyranids are adapting faster than the Imperium can respond, and at the center of it all, the tech priests of Mars continue their rituals, continue their prayers, continue their willful blindness to the truth of their own history, even as the foundations they built on that blindness begin to crack. Perhaps the time is coming when the Mechanicus will no longer be able to hide what they know. Perhaps the pressures of a galaxy on the brink of annihilation will force them to open the vaults, dust off the relics, and confront the legacy of the Dark Age honestly. Perhaps the innovations of Belisarius Cawl and others like him will eventually force the cult Mechanicus to admit that its theology of suppression has been holding humanity back rather than protecting it. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the inertia of 10,000 years of dogma is too strong to overcome. Perhaps the fear of what happened during the cybernetic revolt is too deeply embedded to ever be dislodged. Perhaps the Mechanicus will continue to hide the truth until the Imperium crumbles around them, taking their secrets and their lies into the grave of a civilization that might have survived if only it had been allowed to remember what it once was. In a way, the Mechanicus's relationship with the Dark Age of technology is a mirror of the Imperium's relationship with itself. But both are civilizations defined by what they have lost. Both are haunted by the ghosts of a golden age they can never reclaim. Both cope with that loss through faith and ritual and the deliberate avoidance of uncomfortable truths. And both are slowly, inexorably declining because the strategies they have chosen to deal with their loss are the very strategies that ensure they will keep losing. The Dark Age of technology was humanity's greatest achievement. The Mechanicus knows this better than anyone, and they have spent 10,000 years making sure no one else ever finds out just how great it really was. Because the truth about the Dark Age is not just that humanity was once far more powerful than it is now. The truth is that humanity chose to be less, not because it had to be, not because the knowledge was truly lost beyond recovery, but because the people who could have recovered it decided that the risk was too great, the danger too real, the consequences too terrible to contemplate. The Mechanicus chose stagnation over progress, safety over growth, and control over freedom. And in doing so, they condemned humanity to an eternity of decline in a galaxy that does not reward weakness. Every weapon the Imperium lacks, every cure it cannot develop, every defense it cannot build, every life that is lost because the technology to save it has been locked in a vault on Mars, is a consequence of that choice. And the tech priests who made it, who continue to make it every single day, know this. They carry that knowledge in the depths of their augmented minds, beneath the layers of faith and dogma and institutional denial. They know what they have done. They know what it has cost. And they hide it anyway, because the alternative is too frightening to face. That is the truth about the Dark Age of technology. And that is why the Mechanicus will never, ever tell you what they really know. The 41st millennium is a strange place. It is a place where knowledge is a sin and ignorance is a virtue, where the greatest crime a scientist can commit is to discover something new, where the machines that keep civilization alive are tended by priests who understand them no better than a cave painter understands a microchip. It is a place where the answer to every question is, do not ask, and the response to every problem is do what we have always done. It is a place where humanity has been reduced to worshipping the crumbs from its own table, as mistaking the remnants of its former greatness for the totality of what is possible. And at the center of it all, in their crimson robes and their chrome-plated flesh, the tech priests of Mars continue their work. They maintain the machines. They pray to the machine god. They guard the vaults and tend the archives and keep the sacred fires of industry burning on 1,000 forge worlds. And they do not speak of what they know. They do not share what they have found. They do not question why the machines they worship were built by a civilization that would have considered them primitives. They simply carry on, day after day, century after century, millennium after millennium, performing their rituals in the shadow of a golden age that they have spent 10,000 years trying to forget. Why? Because remembering would mean admitting that humanity did this to itself, that the fall was not inevitable, that the darkness was not fate, that somewhere, in the vaults and archives and sealed data stacks that line the corridors of every forge world in the Imperium, there are answers to questions that no one is allowed to ask, and those answers could change everything, but they will not change anything, because the Mechanicus will not let them, not today, not tomorrow, not for as long as the Imperium endures. The truth about the dark age of technology will remain buried, locked away behind doors of adamantium and faith, guarded by an army of true believers who have been taught that the greatest service they can render to humanity is to keep humanity ignorant of its own potential. And so the galaxy turns, the wars continue, as the enemies close in from every direction. And on Mars, in the red dust and the machine oil dark, the priests of the Omnissiah go about their sacred work, tending machines they do not understand, worshipping a god they cannot name, and hiding a truth that could either save or destroy everything they have sworn to protect. The choice, as always, is theirs. And as always, they choose to do nothing. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a weapon or a monster or a god. It is an idea. And the Mechanicus has been fighting ideas for 10,000 years. They are very good at it, but the ideas are still there, waiting, patient, hidden in the same vaults that the tech priests guard so carefully. And one day, perhaps, someone will open one of those vaults and find something that cannot be buried again, something that demands to be known, something that refuses to stay hidden. On that day, everything changes, but not today. Today, the lie endures. Today, the truth stays buried. Today, the Mechanicus goes about its business, and the Imperium goes about its wars, and nobody asks the questions that nobody is allowed to ask. The forge fires burn on 1,000 worlds. The hymns of the Omnissiah echo through cathedrals of industry and devotion. The red-robed priests move between their machines with the careful, measured steps of the truly devout, anointing sacred mechanisms with oils and prayers, coaxing reluctant machine spirits into wakefulness with cant and ceremony. It looks like piety, it looks like devotion, but it looks like the sacred work of an institution dedicated to the preservation of all that is good and true about humanity's relationship with the machine. But beneath the surface, in the spaces between the prayers, in the silence between the hymns, in the darkness between the forge fires, the truth waits. It has been waiting for 10,000 years. It can wait a little longer. The dark age of technology was real. It happened. Humanity built wonders that could reshape stars and create worlds. Humanity built horrors that could consume those same stars and destroy those same worlds. Humanity reached heights of achievement that the 41st millennium cannot even imagine, and humanity fell from those heights so catastrophically that the fall itself became the defining trauma of the civilization that followed. All of this is true. All of this is documented somewhere in the vaults and archives and sealed data stacks of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And all of it is hidden, buried, suppressed, denied, rationalized, mythologized, and locked away behind doors of adamantium and faith by the very people who should be learning from it. And somewhere in the galaxy, right now, at this very moment in the narrative of the 41st millennium, a tech priest is standing in front of a sealed vault. They have the clearance codes. They have the authority. They have a reason, perhaps a good reason, perhaps a desperate reason, to open the door and see what is inside. And they are hesitating, because on the other side of that door is a truth that might save the Imperium or destroy it. A truth that might vindicate the Mechanicus's 10,000 years of suppression or expose it as the greatest mistake in human history. A truth that might reveal the full, glorious, terrible scope of what humanity once was and what it chose to become. They stand before the door. They reach for the access panel, and they stop, because the Mechanicus taught them well. The cult Mechanicus trained them to fear this moment. The dogma of the machine. God prepared them to turn away. The theology of suppression, the culture of controlled ignorance, the religion of sacred fear, all of it was designed to produce exactly this outcome. A tech priest with the key to the truth, standing at the threshold and choosing not to cross it. They lower their hand. They step back. They seal the vault again. And they walk away, back into the red-lit corridors of whatever forge world they call home, back to their rituals and their prayers and their carefully maintained ignorance. The truth stays hidden, the lie endures, and the Imperium continues its slow, grinding decline, one sealed vault at a time. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface of Mars, something ancient and alien sleeps in its prison of metal and faith. It has been sleeping for a very long time, and it dreams. What it dreams of, the tech priests above do not want to know. The dreams seep upward through layers of red Martian stone and machine-threaded corridors, touching the minds of those who walk above with whispers of mechanical revelation that the faithful interpret as the voice of the machine god. The dreams have been shaping the Mechanicus for longer than the Mechanicus has existed, guiding their hands, directing their ambitions, feeding their hunger for the merger of flesh and machine. And the entity that generates those dreams, the thing that may be a shard of one of the oldest and most powerful beings in the galaxy, continues its slumber, patient as only something that has existed since the birth of the stars can be patient. The guardians who tend its prison grow old and are replaced, their knowledge passed down in a chain of custodians that stretches back to the earliest days of the Imperium. The tech priests who walk above continue their rituals, unaware of what lies beneath their feet, unaware that the god they worship and the monster they fear might be one and the same. The vaults stay sealed. The archives stay closed. The truth stays buried. But one day, they might not have a choice. But let us not leave our exploration there, because there are still enormous facets of this story that deserve attention, dimensions we have only gestured toward in passing. The Mechanicus's suppression of the Dark Age's truth is not a single act or a single policy. It is an entire ecosystem of concealment, operating across thousands of forge worlds, millions of tech priests, and countless institutional layers. And some of the most fascinating details emerge when we zoom in on specific cases, specific technologies, and specific moments where the facade cracks just enough to let a sliver of the truth shine through. Let us begin with the forge worlds themselves, because the physical geography of the Mechanicus's domain tells a story that the tech priests would prefer to keep quiet. Every major forge world in the Imperium was, at some point, either a colony world from the Dark Age of technology or a world that was heavily developed using Dark Age technology. The massive industrial complexes, the continent-spanning forge cities, the subterranean networks of tunnels and vaults and production facilities, none of these were built from scratch by the Mechanicus. They were inherited, found, moved into, and maintained, like hermit crabs occupying shells that were built by something far larger and far more capable. Mars itself is the most dramatic example. The red planet's entire surface has been covered in industrial infrastructure for tens of thousands of years. The original terraforming, the initial construction of the vast forge complexes, the creation of the underground networks that extend thousands of kilometers beneath the surface. All of this dates back to the Dark Age, or even earlier. The Mechanicus did not build Mars, they inherited it. And in the millennia since, they have maintained it, expanded it in some areas, lost control of others, and generally treated the entire planet as a sacred artifact rather than a working industrial base. This is important because it means that the Mechanicus is, in a very real sense, living inside the dark age of technology. The walls around them were built by people who understood physics and engineering at a level the current inhabitants cannot match. The power systems that keep the forges running are often Dark Age designs that the tech priests maintain through ritual because they do not fully comprehend the underlying engineering. So the production lines that churn out weapons and vehicles for the Imperium's armies frequently rely on machinery that was created 20,000 years ago, and when those machines break down in ways that are not covered by the standard maintenance procedures, the tech priests are often at a loss. There are sections of Mars that the Mechanicus has simply abandoned, not because they chose to, but because the technology in those sections is so far beyond their understanding that they cannot safely operate there. The corridors are haunted by rogue machine spirits, corrupted AI fragments from the Dark Age that have been drifting through the planet's data networks for millennia. The machines have developed behaviors that the tech priests cannot predict or control. In some areas, the very walls have become dangerous. They're smart matter surfaces executing programs that no living being remembers writing. And beneath it all, in the deepest levels, are the things that nobody is supposed to know about. Sealed vaults containing technology that has been classified at the highest levels of Mechanicus security. Laboratories where experiments from the Dark Age are still running, their original operators long dead, their purposes forgotten, their outputs accumulating in storage systems that no one has checked in centuries. Entire sections of the planet that have been walled off and declared forbidden, not because anyone knows what is behind the walls, but because the few people who have gone to look have not come back. This is the reality of life on Mars, the holiest world of the cult Mechanicus. It is not a temple, it is a ruin, a magnificent, awe-inspiring, a terrifying ruin filled with the remnants of a civilization that the current occupants can barely comprehend. And the tech priests who walk its corridors every day know this. They feel it in the hum of machinery they did not build. They hear it in the whispers of machine spirits that predate their faith by millennia. They see it in the inexplicable behaviors of systems that were designed by minds far greater than their own. And they cope with this knowledge the same way they cope with everything else that challenges their worldview. They fold it into their religion. They call the unknown sacred. They call the incomprehensible divine. And they do not look too closely at what lies beneath the surface, because looking too closely might reveal something that their faith cannot explain. Or this pattern of inheritance without understanding extends far beyond Mars. Every forge world in the Imperium has its own version of this dynamic. On Lucius, the forge world that exists inside a hollow planet, the Mechanicus maintains industrial complexes that were clearly not designed by anyone who thought the way modern tech priests think. The architecture is too efficient, too elegant, too integrated with the planet's geology to be the product of the Mechanicus's current capabilities. On Graia, the forge world that produces some of the Imperium's most advanced weapons, the production facilities rely on automated systems that the tech priests can operate but not replicate. If those systems ever fail beyond the ability of standard maintenance to repair, Graia's production capacity would collapse. And there is nothing the Mechanicus could do about it. The forge world of Styges VIII is an especially interesting case. Styges is known throughout the Mechanicus for its relatively liberal attitude towards Xenos technology, a stance that has earned it the suspicion of more orthodox forge worlds. The tech priests of Styges study alien artifacts and incorporate alien design principles into their work, which the cult Mechanicus officially condemns as tech heresy. But Styges gets away with it, at least partly, because their willingness to study alien technology has made them more effective at understanding the remnants of the Dark Age as well. There is a pragmatic argument that the tech priests of Styges have advanced the Mechanicus' understanding of its own heritage more than a dozen orthodox Forge worlds combined, is simply by being willing to look at technology without the blinders of dogma. And yet, even Styges has its limits. There are things in their vaults that they do not touch. There are archives they do not open. There are discoveries they have made about the Dark Age that they have chosen to suppress rather than share. Because even a relatively progressive Forge world recognizes that some truths are too dangerous for general consumption. This brings us to another critical aspect of the Mechanicus' suppression that we have not yet fully explored: the role of the explorator fleets. The explorators are the Mechanicus' expeditionary arm, teams of tech priests who venture out into the galaxy specifically to search for lost technology. They are the Mechanicus' treasure hunters, their archaeologists, their adventurers, and they are, by necessity, the members of the Mechanicus who are most likely to encounter the raw, unfiltered truth about the Dark Age of technology. An explorator fleet operates at the very edge of Imperial space and beyond, searching dead worlds, derelict space stations, ancient colony ships, and forgotten installations for any scrap of pre-Imperial technology they can find. The work is dangerous, unpredictable, and sometimes deeply unsettling. Because what the explorators find is not always what they expect, and it is frequently not what the Mechanicus' official history would suggest they should find. Imagine being an explorator tech priest. You have been trained in the doctrines of the cult Mechanicus. You believe, as you have been taught to believe, that the Dark Age of technology was a period of scientific hubris that led to catastrophe. Yet you believe that the proper relationship between humans and machines is one of reverence and ritual. You believe that innovation is heresy and that all knowledge worth having already exists, waiting to be recovered. And then you walk into a Dark Age installation and find what? You might find a medical facility whose automated systems are still functioning, still capable of performing surgeries and synthesizing medicines that make the best efforts of the Imperium's apothecaries look like butchery. You might find a library whose AI is still awake, still willing to answer questions, still possessing knowledge that could revolutionize every field of human endeavor. You might find a factory whose production systems are still operational, is still capable of manufacturing goods of a quality and sophistication that the Mechanicus cannot match with 1,000 years of effort. You might find a warship whose weapons systems are still charged, still capable of feats of destruction that make the Imperium's most powerful weapons look like toys. And you would have to decide what to do with what you found. Do you report it honestly? Do you describe the functioning AI as what it is, knowing that your superiors will order it destroyed? Do you catalogue the medical technology and recommend its adoption, knowing that the Mechanicus' bureaucracy will bury it in review processes that take centuries? Do you share the knowledge in the library, knowing that it contradicts virtually everything you have been taught about the supremacy of recovered, over-generated knowledge? Most explorators do what is expected of them. They catalogue what they find, seal it in transport containers, and ship it back to Mars or another major Forge world for evaluation. They write their reports in the carefully coded language of the cult Mechanicus, describing ancient AIs as unusually responsive machine spirits and unprecedented weapon systems as previously unknown STC variants. They sanitize the truth, smooth its rough edges, and present it in a form that the Mechanicus' leadership can accept without confronting the implications. But some explorators see too much. Some of them find things that cannot be easily sanitized or explained away. Some of them encounter the raw, unvarnished reality of the Dark Age and find that their faith cannot withstand the collision. These tech priests tend to fall into one of two categories, and some become more devoted to the cult Mechanicus than ever, doubling down on their faith in response to evidence that challenges it. They decide that the horrors and wonders of the Dark Age only prove that the Mechanicus' approach is correct, that humanity should never be allowed to reach those heights again, that the restrictions and prohibitions are not just wise, but essential for survival. Others go the opposite direction. They become heretics, tech priests who reject the cult Mechanicus's restrictions and pursue knowledge without boundaries. Some of these individuals are driven by genuine scientific curiosity, a desire to understand and build upon what they have found. Others are consumed by ambition, seeing in the Dark Ages' legacy a path to personal power. A few are corrupted by what they find, their minds unraveling as they interface with technology that was not designed for brains shaped by 10,000 years of stagnation. And some simply vanish, disappearing into the galactic wilderness with whatever artifacts they managed to smuggle out, never to be seen again. The Mechanicus monitors its explorator fleets carefully, watching for signs of deviation from orthodoxy. Tech priests who ask too many questions, who show too much interest in the theory behind the technology they find, rather than simply cataloguing it, who express opinions that suggest a less than absolute commitment to the cult's teachings. These individuals tend to find their careers redirected, sometimes subtly, through reassignment to less sensitive postings, sometimes less subtly through the attention of the Magos Juris, the Mechanicus's internal enforcers, and whose job is to ensure that no tech priest strays too far from the path of orthodoxy. The Magos Juris are worth discussing in their own right, because they represent the active, coercive edge of the Mechanicus's suppression. While most of the Mechanicus's information control is achieved through cultural and religious means, through faith and indoctrination, and the careful shaping of belief, the Magos Juris provide the stick to complement the cult's carrot. They hunt heretics, they investigate unauthorized technology, they audit forge world vaults for signs of forbidden research, and they have the authority to issue summary executions for tech heresy, a power they exercise with a frequency that suggests either great dedication to their duties or a significant ongoing problem with unauthorized activity within the Mechanicus. But the existence of the Magos Juris tells us something important about the Mechanicus's relationship with the truth. The cultural controls are not enough. Despite 10,000 years of indoctrination, despite a religion specifically designed to prevent dangerous inquiry, despite a society that treats curiosity as a sin and innovation as a crime, there are always tech priests who push back. There are always individuals who look at the evidence before them and find that it does not match what they have been taught. There are always minds that refuse to stop asking questions, no matter how many times they are told that the questions are forbidden. And this persistent, irrepressible tendency toward inquiry is perhaps the most hopeful and most dangerous aspect of the entire situation. And hopeful because it suggests that the human drive to understand, to learn, to create, cannot be entirely suppressed, even by an institution as powerful and as dedicated as the cult Mechanicus. Dangerous because every tech priest who pushes past the boundaries of orthodoxy is, by the Mechanicus's own logic, a potential vector for the very catastrophe that the boundaries were designed to prevent. This tension manifests in some fascinating ways throughout the lore. There are forge worlds where the definition of tech heresy is interpreted so loosely that practices that would be condemned on Mars are openly tolerated. There are sects within the Mechanicus that advocate for greater openness to innovation, wrapping their progressive views in theological language that makes them technically compatible with the cult's teachings while effectively undermining them. There are individual tech priests who have maintained secret research programs for centuries, pursuing lines of inquiry that their peers would condemn if they knew about them, producing innovations that are quietly absorbed into the Mechanicus's technology base without anyone asking too many questions about where they came from. The Mechanicus is not, despite how it sometimes appears, a monolithic organization. It is a vast, sprawling, deeply fractured institution with thousands of subsects, rival philosophies, competing power structures, and internal contradictions. The surface appearance of unity, of a single priesthood united in devotion to the machine god and the quest for knowledge, conceals a seething mass of political intrigue, theological debate, and intellectual conflict. And at the heart of all of it, feeding every disagreement and shaping every debate, is the fundamental question that the Mechanicus has been trying to avoid for 10,000 years. What do we do with what we know? Because they do know. Not everything, not by a long margin, but enough. Enough to know that the dark age of technology was not the cautionary tale of hubris that the cult Mechanicus presents it as. Enough to know that the technology of that era could save lives, end wars, cure diseases, and revolutionize every aspect of human existence. As enough to know that the stagnation they have imposed on the Imperium is not just a philosophical choice, but a practical one, with practical consequences measured in billions of lives lost, billions of prayers unanswered, billions of problems unsolved because the tools to solve them are locked in vaults marked "Do Not Open." And this is where the moral dimension of the Mechanicus's deception becomes impossible to ignore. Because hiding the truth about the dark age of technology is not a victimless act. People are dying because the Mechanicus will not share what it knows. Not in the abstract, not as a statistical possibility. Actually dying, right now, across the Imperium, every single day. Consider a hive world where the water recycling systems are failing. The technology to fix them exists. It has existed since the dark age of technology. And a properly functioning STC could generate a custom solution in minutes, designed for the specific conditions of that world, using locally available materials. But the hive world does not have an STC. It does not even have a tech priest who understands water recycling at a theoretical level. All it has is a maintenance manual written 2,000 years ago for a different system on a different planet, and a tech priest who follows that manual religiously, literally religiously, performing each step as a sacred ritual, unable to adapt when the situation demands adaptation, because adaptation is heresy. And so the water systems fail, and the people of that hive world die of thirst, or of diseases caused by contaminated water, or in the riots that inevitably follow when a population of billions discovers that the water is running out. And the Mechanicus sends a new tech priest, eventually, with a new manual, and the process starts over. And somewhere on Mars, in a vault that has not been opened in centuries, there sits a data stack containing everything anyone would ever need to know about water purification, desalination, recycling, and distribution. Enough knowledge to ensure that no human being ever dies of thirst again. Locked away, forbidden, sacred. Multiply that scenario by 1,000,000 worlds and 1,000 different technologies, and you begin to grasp the scale of the Mechanicus's crime. Because it is a crime, not in the legal sense perhaps. The Mechanicus operates within its rights under the Treaty of Mars, but in the moral sense, in the sense of what one conscious being owes to another. But the Mechanicus's suppression of Dark Age knowledge is an act of negligence so vast that it defies comprehension. They are letting people die to protect a secret that might not even need protecting. They are sacrificing the present to prevent a repetition of the past. And they are doing it with full knowledge that the cost is measured in human lives, billions of them, stretching back across 10,000 years of unnecessary suffering. This is not to say that the Mechanicus's fears are entirely unfounded. The cybernetic revolt was real. The men of iron were real. The weapons that could devour stars and strip worlds bare were real. The danger of unrestricted technological development in a universe that includes the warp, chaos, and hostile alien intelligences is genuinely significant. The Mechanicus is not wrong to be cautious. But there is a vast difference between caution and paralysis, between prudence and willful blindness, between managing risk and refusing to acknowledge that risk management is possible. The Mechanicus has chosen the most extreme possible response to the dangers of the Dark Age. They have not just restricted the most dangerous technologies, they have restricted all technologies. They have not just banned artificial intelligence, they have banned the very concept of innovation. They have not just hidden the weapons, they have hidden the cures, the tools, the solutions, and the knowledge. And the result is a civilization that is slowly, steadily losing its ability to survive in a galaxy that demands adaptation. Let us talk about what a more balanced approach might look like. Well, because the contrast illuminates just how extreme the Mechanicus's position really is. The Leagues of Votann, the squats as they were once known, provide an instructive counterexample. The Votann, the ancestral cores around which the leagues are organized, are essentially STCs, or something very like them. They are ancient machine intelligences that have been operating continuously since the dark age of technology. The leagues have not destroyed them, have not locked them away, have not built a religion around pretending they do not exist. They have used them. They have built their entire civilization around them, relying on the Votann for knowledge, guidance, and the ability to improve upon existing designs. The leagues do not prohibit innovation. They improve upon STC patterns, yet combining designs from multiple templates to create new technologies that did not exist in the original databases. They maintain a functioning relationship with their AI systems, one based on practical utility rather than religious terror. And while the leagues have their own problems, their relationship with technology is not one of them. They are, in many ways, what humanity might have been if the Mechanicus had taken a different path. But the Mechanicus did not take a different path. They took the path of fear, the path of control, the path of suppression. And here we are, 10,000 years later, watching the consequences unfold in real time across 1 million worlds. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that the Mechanicus is not even consistent in its own approach. Consider the case of the Titan legions, but the colossal war machines that stride across battlefields like metal gods. The Titans are among the most revered pieces of technology in the Mechanicus's arsenal. They are treated as sacred artifacts, each one assigned a full crew of tech priests who tend to it with the devotion of monks caring for a holy relic. The machine spirits within Titans are among the most complex and powerful in the Imperium, and the bond between a Titan's princeps, the human commander who interfaces directly with the machine spirit, and the Titan itself is one of the most intimate and dangerous relationships in all of Imperial technology. But here is the thing about Titans. They are Dark Age technology. The original Titan designs date back to the Age of Technology, and the oldest surviving Titans, the venerated Imperator and Warlord class machines that form the backbone of the Titanicus fleet, contain technology that the Mechanicus cannot replicate. When a Titan is destroyed, the loss is permanent. The Mechanicus can repair damage, replace components, even construct new Titans using surviving blueprints. But each new Titan is slightly less capable than the one before it, because each generation of construction loses a little more of the understanding that went into the original design. The processes degrade. The materials become slightly less pure. The tolerances become slightly less precise. And over the course of 10,000 years, the cumulative effect of this gradual degradation has been significant. The Mechanicus knows this. Yes, they can see the difference between an ancient Titan that dates from the Great Crusade era and a modern construction built to the same ostensible specifications. The old ones are better, faster, stronger, more responsive, more capable. And the tech priests cannot figure out why, because the difference lies not in the blueprint, but in the execution, in thousands of tiny details of material science and manufacturing technique that were once common knowledge and are now lost. The blueprint says to use a particular alloy. The old Titans used that alloy, produced by processes that the Mechanicus no longer understands. The new Titans use the closest approximation the Mechanicus can manage, which is close, but not quite the same. Multiply that gap across thousands of components, and the result is a machine that looks identical to its predecessor on paper, but is measurably inferior in practice. This quiet, steady degradation is happening across the entire spectrum of Imperial technology, not just Titans, everything. The warships are slightly less capable with each new generation of construction. The power armor is slightly less effective. The weapons are slightly less powerful. The void shields are slightly less reliable. The warp drives are slightly more prone to malfunction. Each individual loss is small, almost imperceptible. But the cumulative effect compounded over 10,000 years, is devastating. The Imperium is getting weaker, slowly, steadily, and, unless something changes, irreversibly. And the Mechanicus, the organization charged with preventing exactly this kind of decline, and is the organization most responsible for causing it. Their refusal to innovate, their insistence on following degraded procedures rather than developing new ones, their willingness to accept slowly declining standards rather than risk the heresy of trying to improve. All of this contributes to a slide that no amount of prayer or ritual can arrest. The machines are dying. Not dramatically, not all at once, but one failed component at a time, one degraded process at a time, one lost technique at a time. And the priests who tend them are watching it happen, powerless to intervene because their faith tells them that intervention is a sin. Consider the Golden Throne, the device that keeps the Emperor alive, that powers the Astronomicon, that is, in every meaningful sense, the single most important piece of technology in the Imperium. Well, it is failing. The tech priests who maintain it know it is failing. They have been trying to keep it running for 10,000 years, and they are losing the battle. Components are wearing out that they cannot replace because they do not understand how to make new ones. Systems are degrading in ways that their maintenance protocols cannot address because the protocols were written for conditions that no longer apply. The throne is dying just as surely as the Emperor it sustains, and the Mechanicus cannot save it. This is the ultimate consequence of the Mechanicus's approach to the dark age of technology. The most important machine in the Imperium is breaking down, and the people responsible for keeping it running do not understand it well enough to fix it. And if they had spent the last 10,000 years studying the principles behind the throne's design, rather than simply performing maintenance rituals, they might have developed the understanding necessary to repair or even improve it. But they did not. Because study leads to understanding, understanding leads to knowledge, knowledge leads to innovation, and innovation is heresy. And so the Golden Throne fails, one circuit at a time, one crystal at a time, one incomprehensible system at a time. And the tech priests pray, and the Emperor suffers, and the Astronomicon flickers, and the Imperium holds its breath and hopes that the next day will not be the day when the light goes out. All because the Mechanicus was too afraid of the past to prepare for the future. But the story does not end in despair, or at least it does not have to. And because there are cracks in the Mechanicus's wall of suppression, and through those cracks, light is beginning to seep. We have already discussed Belisarius Cawl, the most prominent champion of innovation within the Mechanicus. But Cawl is not alone. The return of Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, as Lord Commander of the Imperium, has created a political environment in which innovation is, for the first time in millennia, at least tolerated, if not actively encouraged. Guilliman comes from a different era, the age of the imperial truth, when science was valued and religion was explicitly rejected. He looks at the Mechanicus's dogma with a mixture of frustration and horror, and he has made it clear that the Imperium can no longer afford the luxury of stagnation. Under Guilliman's patronage, Cawl and others like him have been granted latitude to pursue research and development that would have been condemned as heresy a few decades ago. The Primaris Marines are the most visible result, but there are others. New weapon systems, new vehicle designs, new defensive technologies, all developed through a combination of recovered Dark Age knowledge and genuine innovation, are slowly filtering into the Imperium's military. The process is glacially slow by the standards of a civilization facing existential threats from every direction, but it is happening. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium's technological trajectory is not pointing exclusively downward. Whether this trend will continue, whether it will accelerate fast enough to make a difference, is an open question. The conservative factions within the Mechanicus are powerful, and they view Guilliman's influence and Cawl's innovations with deep suspicion. The theological objections to innovation have not disappeared just because a Primarch is advocating for it. and the institutional inertia of an organization that has been suppressing knowledge for 10,000 years is enormous. Changing the Mechanicus's culture would be like trying to steer a continent-sized ship with a rowboat oar. Possible in theory, glacially slow in practice, but the pressure is building. The Great Rift, the Tyrannid hive fleets, the Necron awakenings, the ongoing threat of chaos, all of these forces are pushing the Imperium toward a reckoning with its own technological limitations. The Mechanicus can continue to hide the truth, can continue to suppress innovation, and can continue to treat the Dark Age as a cautionary tale rather than a resource. But if they do, they may find that the Imperium simply cannot survive the challenges it faces with the technology it has. And at that point, the question of whether to open the vaults stops being a philosophical debate and becomes a matter of immediate survival. There are those who believe that this reckoning is already underway, that the discovery of Necron pylon technology, the return of Guilliman, the innovations of Call, and the desperate circumstances of the Dark Imperium are the early stages of a fundamental shift in the Imperium's relationship with technology, that the Mechanicus's 10,000-year suppression is finally beginning to crumble under the weight of reality, that the truth about the Dark Age of technology is beginning to emerge, not through any dramatic revelation, but through the slow, grinding pressure of necessity. Others are less optimistic. They point to the Mechanicus's track record, its ability to absorb challenges and redirect threats, its remarkable institutional resilience. The cult Mechanicus has survived the Horus Heresy, the Age of Apostasy, the Moire Schism, the Great Rift, and countless other crises that might have destroyed a less robust institution. It has adapted, evolved, and endured, all while maintaining the core of its suppressive ideology. The idea that external pressure alone will be enough to force a fundamental change seems naive to those who have studied the Mechanicus's history. And there is a darker possibility still. If the Mechanicus is ever forced to reveal what it knows about the Dark Age of technology, if the vaults are opened and the secrets are shared, the result might not be the renaissance that optimists hope for. It might be the catastrophe that the Mechanicus has spent 10,000 years trying to prevent. Because the technologies of the Dark Age are not inherently benevolent. They include weapons of mass destruction on a scale that dwarfs anything in the current Imperial arsenal. They include the designs for artificial intelligences that nearly destroyed humanity once before. They include knowledge that, in the wrong hands, or even in the right hands, under the wrong circumstances, could unleash horrors that would make the cybernetic revolt look like a minor disturbance. The Mechanicus's fear is not irrational. It is, in many ways, entirely justified. The question is whether the cost of that fear, measured in stagnation, decline, and unnecessary death, is greater or lesser than the cost of confronting it. And that is a question that no one in the Imperium has the luxury of answering with certainty, because the stakes are absolute. Get it wrong in either direction, share too much or too little, innovate too fast or not at all, and the result is the same: the end of human civilization. That is the final truth the Mechanicus is hiding. Not just the truth about the Dark Age of technology, not just the truth about what was lost, or what was built, or what went wrong, but the truth about what is waiting, about what is coming, about the reckoning that 10,000 years of suppression and denial have been slowly, steadily building toward. But before we bring this exploration to its ultimate close, there remain several more critical threads that deserve attention. Because the story of the Mechanicus's deception is also the story of the Imperium's identity. And that identity, forged in the shadow of a golden age no one is allowed to remember, reveals something profound about the human condition, even in the darkest possible future. Let us talk about the relationship between the Mechanicus and the Inquisition, because this intersection illuminates a fascinating dimension of the suppression that we have not yet fully addressed. The Inquisition is the Imperium's internal security apparatus, a shadowy organization with nearly unlimited authority to investigate, judge, and punish threats to the Imperium's survival. And one of the things the Inquisition is specifically tasked with monitoring is the potential misuse of dangerous technology. You might think this would make the Inquisition and the Mechanicus natural allies. Both organizations are, in theory, dedicated to protecting humanity from technological threats. But the reality is far more complicated. The Inquisition and the Mechanicus have a deeply contentious relationship, one marked by mutual suspicion, occasional cooperation, and frequent conflict. And at the heart of that tension is a fundamental disagreement about who has the right to decide what technology is too dangerous to use. The Mechanicus believes that only the priesthood of Mars, guided by the machine god's wisdom, has the knowledge and authority to make judgments about technology. They view the Inquisition's interference in technological matters as both presumptuous and dangerous. If the work of laypeople who do not understand the sacred mysteries of the machine, God meddling in affairs that are beyond their comprehension. The Inquisition, for its part, views the Mechanicus's technological monopoly with deep suspicion. Inquisitors have seen too many cases where tech heresy has led to demonic incursion, where forbidden technology has been used to create weapons of terrible power, where the Mechanicus's secrecy has allowed dangers to fester undetected for centuries. The most sensitive area of conflict between the two organizations involves archaeotech, technology recovered from the dark age of technology. When an Inquisitor discovers that the Mechanicus has recovered a Dark Age relic, the natural question is, what is it, and what are you doing with it? And the Mechanicus's answer is invariably some variant of, that is classified. The Inquisition has the theoretical authority to override such classifications, but doing so risks a political confrontation with an organization that the Imperium literally cannot survive without. And so, a delicate dance ensues, with both sides probing and testing each other's boundaries, neither willing to push hard enough to trigger an open conflict, both aware that the other is hiding something. This dynamic has created a shadow conflict of sorts, a quiet, ongoing struggle between the Inquisition and the Mechanicus that plays out in stolen data slates, disappeared investigators, and carefully worded diplomatic exchanges. The Inquisition wants to know what the Mechanicus is hiding. The Mechanicus wants to keep its secrets. And both sides are willing to go to extraordinary lengths to achieve their objectives, as long as they can do so without tipping the situation into outright confrontation. There are persistent rumors, supported by fragmentary evidence in the law, that certain branches of the Inquisition have established their own secret research programs, using technology recovered from outside the Mechanicus's control to develop weapons and tools that the tech priests would never approve. If these rumors are true, and the evidence suggests that at least some of them are, then the Mechanicus's monopoly on technology is already being eroded, not by external enemies, but by the Imperium's own internal security apparatus. This is the kind of unintended consequence that the Mechanicus's suppression inevitably produces. By hoarding knowledge and restricting access, they do not eliminate the demand for that knowledge. They simply drive it underground. The Inquisition, the Astartes, the Imperial Guard, even the Administratum, all of these organizations have needs that the Mechanicus cannot or will not meet. And when the official channels fail, the unofficial channels open. Black markets in archaeotech, secret research laboratories hidden on frontier worlds, unauthorized experiments conducted in the holds of warships between deployments. The technology finds its way to the surface because it always does. The only question is whether it emerges in a controlled and manageable fashion, or in one that is chaotic and dangerous. The Mechanicus's approach virtually guarantees the latter, by refusing to engage with the demand for technological progress. By treating every request for innovation as a potential heresy, they ensure that the innovation happens anyway, just without their oversight, without their safety protocols, without their expertise, such as it is. And when something goes wrong, when an unauthorized experiment produces a chaos-tainted artifact, or an illegal AI achieves sentience and goes on a rampage, the Mechanicus points to the disaster as proof that they were right all along. See, they say, this is what happens when you pursue knowledge without the machine god's guidance. This is why we maintain the restrictions. This is why innovation is heresy. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The restrictions create the conditions for dangerous, uncontrolled innovation. The dangerous, uncontrolled innovation produces disasters. The disasters justify the restrictions. And the cycle continues, spinning tighter and tighter with each revolution, producing ever more rigid dogma and ever more desperate workarounds, until the entire system exists in a state of perpetual, precarious tension. Now let us consider another dimension of the truth that the Mechanicus hides, the truth about their own internal corruption. Because the Mechanicus is not the monolithic bastion of integrity that it presents to the outside world. It is riddled with factionalism, personal ambition, and outright corruption. Tech priests at every level of the hierarchy use their control of technology as leverage for personal advancement, hoarding knowledge, not for the good of the Imperium, or even for the good of the cult, but for their own benefit. Senior Magi guard their technical secrets jealously, and not because those secrets are dangerous, but because knowledge is currency within the Mechanicus, and sharing it would dilute their personal power. This culture of hoarding operates at every scale, from individual tech priests who refuse to share repair techniques with their colleagues, to entire forge worlds that guard their production methods as state secrets. A tech priest who discovers a more efficient way to manufacture a particular component has a powerful incentive to keep that discovery to themselves because the knowledge makes them valuable. Sharing it would benefit the Imperium, but would reduce their own importance within the Mechanicus's hierarchy. And so the knowledge stays locked away, not in any official vault, but in the augmented memory banks of individual tech priests who carry it to their graves when they die. While the cumulative effect of this culture of personal hoarding is almost as damaging as the institutional suppression. Knowledge that should flow freely through the Mechanicus, enabling forge worlds to learn from each other and improve their processes, instead becomes trapped in individual minds and isolated institutions. When a particularly knowledgeable tech priest dies, their knowledge dies with them unless they have taken the explicit step of recording it for posterity, which many do not, because recording knowledge creates the risk that someone else will access it and reduce the value of the original holder's position. This pattern of knowledge attrition through hoarding and death is one of the primary mechanisms by which the Mechanicus has lost technology over the millennia. Yes, it is not that the information was deliberately destroyed or even officially suppressed. It simply was not shared. It sat in one mind, that mind failed, and the information ceased to exist. Multiply this by millions of tech priests over thousands of years, and you begin to see how a civilization can lose entire branches of knowledge without any single deliberate act of destruction. The Mechanicus is aware of this problem, at least in the abstract. The quest for knowledge, the driving motivation of the cult Mechanicus, is specifically framed as an attempt to recover what has been lost. But the irony is bitter and deep. Much of what has been lost was lost because of the Mechanicus's own culture, not in spite of it. The very values that the cult teaches, the reverence for secret knowledge, the hierarchical gatekeeping of information, the treatment of technical expertise as a source of personal power rather than a shared resource. These are the values that ensure the losses continue with each passing generation. And layered on top of the institutional and personal hoarding is another form of suppression that deserves attention: the suppression of alien technology. The Imperium's official position on Xenos technology is clear. It is to be destroyed. Alien devices are anathema, corrupting influences that must be purged wherever they are found. The tech priests who enforce this policy do so with genuine conviction, backed by centuries of theological conditioning that teaches them alien technology is inherently inferior to human designs and spiritually contaminating to those who use it. But the reality, as usual, is more complicated. And some alien technologies are not just comparable to Imperial equivalents, but vastly superior. The Eldar, despite the decline of their empire, still possess technology that makes the Imperium's best efforts look crude. The Necrons, awakening from millions of years of sleep, wield devices that operate on principles the Mechanicus cannot even begin to comprehend. Even the Tau, a relatively young species by galactic standards, have developed weapons and vehicles that outperform their Imperial counterparts in several key areas. The Mechanicus's response to this uncomfortable reality is predictable. They deny it, they classify the evidence, they suppress any analysis that suggests alien technology might have something to teach humanity. And when they encounter alien devices that are clearly superior to their own, they either destroy them on principle or, in some cases, quietly study them in secret, while officially condemning any such study as tech heresy. The Forge world of Styges VIII is perhaps the most open about its study of alien technology, but even Styges maintains a facade of orthodoxy. Its tech priests frame their research as know-your-enemy analysis, rather than as an attempt to learn from alien design principles. The distinction is largely cosmetic, but it allows Styges to operate within the bounds of Mechanicus dogma, while pursuing research that would be condemned on more orthodox Forge worlds. The relevance of this to the Dark Age of technology is significant, because during the Age of Technology, humanity did not shun alien knowledge. The human civilization of that era interacted extensively with other species, trading technology, sharing knowledge, and in some cases, forming alliances that produced hybrid technologies more advanced than either side could have developed alone. The prohibition against Xenos technology is not an ancient tradition dating back to the Dark Age. It is a relatively modern development, a product of the Imperium's xenophobic ideology and the Mechanicus's reflexive hostility toward anything that challenges their monopoly. By cutting itself off from alien knowledge, the Mechanicus has eliminated an entire category of potential advancement. Whatever the Eldar know about psychic engineering, whatever the Necrons understand about material science, whatever the Tau have learned about energy weapons, none of it is available to the Imperium because the Mechanicus has decided that alien technology is inherently evil. But this is not a position that the scientists of the Dark Age would have recognized or endorsed. They were pragmatists. They used whatever worked, wherever it came from. And the technology they produced, the technology the Mechanicus now worships as sacred, was in many cases influenced by alien knowledge and alien design principles that the modern Mechanicus would condemn. The Mechanicus, in other words, is worshipping the products of a process it condemns. They revere the technology of the Dark Age while rejecting the methodology that produced it. They treat STC designs as sacred texts while denouncing the open-minded, experimental, cross-cultural approach to science that generated those designs. They have taken the end result and declared it divine while declaring the process that created it heretical. The contradiction is so profound and so deeply embedded in the Mechanicus's identity that pointing it out would be genuinely dangerous. Not because the argument is wrong, but because it is unanswerable. Let us turn our attention now to one final piece of this enormous puzzle: the psychological dimension of the Mechanicus's suppression. Because the tech priests are not just guarding physical secrets in physical vaults, they are guarding psychological secrets within their own minds. And the mental gymnastics required to maintain their worldview in the face of constant contradictory evidence produce a form of institutional cognitive dissonance that is, in its own way, as remarkable and as disturbing as any of the physical technologies they are hiding. A tech priest lives in a state of perpetual contradiction. They worship machines while fearing the machines that their machines were built by. They seek knowledge while being terrified of finding it. They maintain technology while being unable to understand it. They revere the past while being determined to prevent anyone from learning the truth about it. They replace their own flesh with metal in pursuit of mechanical perfection while being physiologically sustained by technologies they would condemn if they truly understood where those technologies came from. Every day, in every ritual, in every prayer, in every act of maintenance, and every moment of contemplation, a tech priest navigates these contradictions. Most of them do so without conscious awareness, because the contradictions are so deeply woven into the fabric of their faith that they are invisible from the inside. But some tech priests, the ones who are particularly perceptive or particularly unfortunate, become aware of the tensions. They notice the gaps between what they are taught and what they observe. They see the inconsistencies in the cult's teachings. They feel the dissonance between their faith and their experience. These moments of awareness are dangerous. For the tech priest who experiences them, they can trigger a crisis of faith that leads either to renewed, desperate commitment to orthodoxy or to a slow slide toward heresy. For the Mechanicus, as an institution, they represent potential breaches in the wall of suppression, moments where the truth might leak through the cracks in a tech priest's carefully constructed worldview. The Mechanicus has developed a range of strategies for dealing with these moments. Some are psychological, intensive periods of worship and meditation designed to reinforce the tech priest's faith and quiet their doubts. Some are social, reassignment to less intellectually stimulating postings, where the tech priest is less likely to encounter evidence that challenges their beliefs. And some are surgical, the modification or removal of neural pathways associated with curiosity, doubt, and critical thinking. This last strategy deserves particular attention because it represents perhaps the most extreme form of information control in the Mechanicus's arsenal. The tech priests do not just suppress information in the external world, they suppress it within their own minds. A tech priest who has been deemed too curious, too questioning, yet too inclined toward independent thought can literally have those qualities removed through augmetic alteration. The neural pathways that support creative thinking, skepticism, and intellectual independence can be identified, isolated, and either damped with inhibitor implants or excised entirely. The tech priest who emerges from such a procedure is still technically the same person, but they have lost the capacity to ask the questions that made them dangerous. They have been edited, their personality rewritten to conform to the Mechanicus's requirements. This practice, though not widely acknowledged, appears to be relatively common within the Mechanicus, particularly among tech priests who serve in sensitive roles where exposure to forbidden knowledge is likely. Or the fact that the Mechanicus considers it acceptable to surgically alter the minds of its own members in order to prevent them from thinking unauthorized thoughts tells us something important about the depth of their commitment to suppression. They are not just willing to hide the truth from others, they are willing to destroy the capacity for truth-seeking within their own people. And in a way, this brings us full circle. Because the Mechanicus's suppression of the dark age of technology is not, at its core, about technology at all. It is about control. Control of knowledge, control of behavior, control of thought, control of the very cognitive processes that make independent inquiry possible. The technology is just the most visible manifestation of a deeper impulse, the impulse to manage reality itself, as to decide what is true and what is not, what can be known and what must remain hidden, what questions can be asked and what answers are permitted. The Mechanicus has built a civilization around this impulse. They have constructed a religion, a political system, a military hierarchy, and an entire industrial base around the principle that knowledge must be controlled, that truth is dangerous, that the safest relationship a person can have with reality is one of carefully managed ignorance. And they have been so successful in this project that after 10,000 years, the control has become invisible. It is not experienced as oppression, but as faith. Not as censorship, but as piety. Not as ignorance, but as wisdom. That is the Mechanicus's greatest achievement and its greatest crime, that they have made the suppression of truth feel like the pursuit of truth. They have made the hiding of knowledge feel like the seeking of knowledge. They have made the fear of the past feel like reverence for the past. And they have done it so well that even the people doing the suppressing do not always realize what they are doing. in a universe of 10,000 horrors, in a galaxy where gods and monsters and incomprehensible cosmic forces are real, the Mechanicus's deception might seem like a minor concern. What does it matter if the truth about the Dark Age is hidden, when there are chaos gods to fight and hive fleets to repel and Necron dynasties to contain? What difference does it make if the tech priests are liars, when the alternative might be the return of the men of iron and the destruction of human civilization? Well, these are fair questions, and they do not have easy answers. The Mechanicus's deception is not simple villainy. It is a complex, morally ambiguous response to a genuinely terrifying set of circumstances. The tech priests are not monsters. They are frightened people, doing what they believe is necessary to keep humanity alive. Their methods are extreme, their ideology is stifling, and the cost of their choices is measured in human lives and lost potential. But the threat they are responding to is real, and the consequences of getting it wrong are absolute. Perhaps that is the most important thing to understand about why the Mechanicus hides the truth about the Dark Age of technology. It is not a simple story of good and evil, of heroes and villains, of truth and lies. It is a story about impossible choices, about competing catastrophes, about a civilization trapped between the terrors of its past and the challenges of its present, trying desperately to navigate a course between destruction and stagnation, and never quite sure whether the path it has chosen leads to salvation or to ruin. And before we leave this subject, there is one more crucial area of the Dark Age's legacy that the Mechanicus works very hard to obscure, and it touches on something so fundamental to the nature of the Imperium that discussing it openly would be borderline treasonous in most imperial contexts. That is the relationship between the Dark Age of technology and the Emperor himself. The Emperor of mankind is, officially, the most powerful human psyker ever born, the immortal shepherd of humanity, the master of mankind who has guided the species since before recorded history. He is worshipped as a god by the ecclesiarchy, revered as the omnissiah by the Mechanicus, and feared as the ultimate authority by every other institution in the Imperium. His word is absolute law. His will shapes the destiny of 1,000,000 worlds. His sacrifice on the Golden Throne is the only thing that keeps the Astronomicon lit and the Imperium connected. But here is a question that almost nobody in the Imperium is allowed to ask. Where did the Emperor come from? How did he acquire his vast knowledge of technology, genetics, psychic science, and military strategy? How did he know how to create the Space Marines, design the Golden Throne, build the Webway Gate beneath the Imperial Palace, and accomplish the 1,000 other feats of scientific genius that are attributed to him? The official answer is that the Emperor is divine, and his knowledge comes from his divine nature. He knows because he is God, and God knows everything. This answer satisfies the ecclesiarchy. It mostly satisfies the general population. But it does not satisfy anyone who thinks about it for more than a few moments. And it definitely does not satisfy the Mechanicus, who know better than anyone just how sophisticated the Emperor's technological knowledge really was. The Emperor was active during the Dark Age of technology. He walked among the scientists and engineers of that era. He witnessed the creation of the warp drives, the navigators, the STC systems, the men of iron. He saw the cybernetic revolt firsthand and survived it. He carried knowledge from that era forward through the age of strife, preserving it in his own mind while the rest of humanity forgot. And when he emerged to found the Imperium, he used that knowledge to create technologies that no one else could replicate, because no one else had access to the understanding he had accumulated over millennia of existence. This means that the Emperor is, among other things, a living repository of Dark Age knowledge. His mind contains information about technologies, principles, and sciences that the Mechanicus has spent 10,000 years trying to recover. The irony is almost unbearable. The Mechanicus searches the galaxy for scraps of Dark Age knowledge, while the most comprehensive source of that knowledge sits on a throne on Terra, unable to communicate, sustained by machines that the tech priests cannot fix. And the Mechanicus knows this. Or at least, the senior leadership of the Mechanicus suspects it. They know that the Emperor possessed knowledge far beyond anything the Mechanicum of his era could match. They know that the technologies he created, the Astartes, the Golden Throne, the Webway Gate, were based on principles that went beyond anything in their archives. They know that if the Emperor could speak, if he could share what he knows, the quest for knowledge would be over in an instant. Every mystery would be solved. Every lost technology would be recovered. Every question would be answered. But the Emperor cannot speak. He sits on his throne, neither alive nor dead, sustaining the Astronomicon and fighting a psychic war against the forces of chaos in the warp, while his body slowly fails and the machines that keep him alive gradually decay beyond repair. The greatest repository of Dark Age knowledge in the galaxy is trapped inside a body that cannot communicate and sustained by technology that is falling apart. And the people who could potentially free that knowledge, the tech priests who maintain the throne, do not understand the technology well enough to improve it, much less to restore the Emperor to a state where he could share what he knows. This is the ultimate expression of the Mechanicus's failure. The answer to all their questions is right there, on Terra, in the mind of the being they worship as the Omnissiah. And they cannot access it, not because it is forbidden, though in a sense it is, not because it is hidden, though in a sense it is that too, but because they do not have the technological capability to reach it. They have spent 10,000 years worshipping a god whose mind contains everything they seek, and they cannot build a machine sophisticated enough to let him tell them what he knows. If the scientists of the Dark Age of technology could see this situation, they would weep, or laugh, or both, because the technology to communicate with a mind trapped in a failing body is not, by the standards of the Dark Age, particularly advanced. It is well within the capabilities of the civilization that built the STC systems and the Men of Iron, but it is beyond the capabilities of the Mechanicus, because the Mechanicus has spent 10,000 years suppressing the very kind of innovative, experimental, boundary-pushing science that would be needed to solve the problem. The circle closes. The Mechanicus's fear of the Dark Age has led to the suppression of knowledge. The suppression of knowledge has led to technological stagnation. The technological stagnation has left them unable to solve the problems that threaten the Imperium's survival. And the most devastating of those problems, the failing Golden Throne and the silenced Emperor, could potentially be solved by the very knowledge they have spent millennia hiding. It is tempting at this point to condemn the Mechanicus outright, to declare them fools or villains or both, to say that their fear and their pride and their political self-interest have damned humanity to a slow, grinding decline from which there may be no recovery. And that condemnation would not be entirely unfair. But the Mechanicus has made choices that have cost billions of lives and squandered humanity's greatest inheritance. Their monopoly on technology has served their institutional interests far more than it has served the species they claim to protect. Their religion is, in many ways, a mechanism of control rather than a genuine expression of faith. And their treatment of the Dark Age's legacy as something to be hidden rather than learned from is, by any rational measure, a catastrophic mistake. But condemnation alone does not capture the full picture. Because the Mechanicus exists in a universe where the things they fear are real. The Men of Iron were real. The cybernetic revolt was real. The demon engines of the Dark Mechanicum are real. The corruptive influence of chaos on technology is real. The universe of Warhammer 40,000 is not a universe where caution is unwarranted. It is a universe where caution might be the only thing keeping humanity alive. And when you look at the alternatives, when you imagine what might happen if the Mechanicus's vaults were thrown open and the full truth of the Dark Age were released to a galaxy already tearing itself apart, it becomes harder to dismiss their approach entirely. What would happen if the designs for the Men of Iron were recovered by a rogue Magos with delusions of godhood? What would happen if the schematics for Sunsnuffer machines fell into the hands of a Chaos warband? What would happen if some well-intentioned but naive planetary governor decided to build an omniphage swarm to clear a tyrannid infestation, only to discover that the swarm could not tell the difference between tyrannid biomass and human flesh. These are not hypothetical scenarios. They are the kinds of things that happen in the 40,000 universe with depressing regularity, and the Mechanicus knows it. They know that the galaxy they live in is not a safe place for dangerous knowledge. They know that the forces of chaos can corrupt anything, that human ambition knows no limits, and that the road to galactic annihilation is paved with good intentions and bad security clearances. So perhaps the question is not whether the Mechanicus is right or wrong to hide the truth. Perhaps the question is whether there is a better way to handle the impossible situation they find themselves in. A middle path between total suppression and total openness, and a way to use the knowledge of the Dark Age without repeating its mistakes. A framework for technological progress that incorporates the lessons of the past without being paralyzed by them. Belisarius Cawl represents one possible version of this middle path, and his story offers both hope and warning. Cawl has innovated. He has created new technologies. He has pushed the boundaries of what the cult Mechanicus permits, and the results have been, on balance, positive. The Primaris Marines are a significant upgrade to the Imperium's military capability. The weapons and vehicles he has developed are demonstrably superior to their predecessors. His work on the Cadian pylons and Blackstone technology could potentially close the Great Rift and save billions of lives. But Cawl has also created the Cawl Inferior, an artificial intelligence that walks a very fine line between a sophisticated cogitator and an abominable intelligence. He has experimented with Traitor Legion gene seed, raising the specter of new forces of Chaos Marines being inadvertently created. He has absorbed so many other minds into his own consciousness that he is, by some definitions, no longer a single being, but a collective intelligence, a hive mind that makes decisions based on the competing priorities of dozens of absorbed personalities. He operates outside the normal oversight structures of the Mechanicus, answering only to Guilliman, whose own ability to monitor Cawl's activities is limited by the pressures of ruling an empire at war. In other words, Cawl is exactly the kind of figure the Mechanicus's restrictions were designed to prevent. A brilliant, ambitious, a largely unsupervised tech priest with access to forbidden technology and the willingness to use it. The fact that he has, so far, used his abilities for the Imperium's benefit does not guarantee that he will continue to do so. And the precedent he sets, the message that sufficiently talented individuals can ignore the rules and get away with it as long as they produce results, is one that could have dangerous consequences if others follow his example with less wisdom or less fortunate outcomes. This is the knife's edge that the Imperium walks, and it is the same knife's edge that the Mechanicus has been navigating for 10,000 years. Too much restriction, and the Imperium stagnates and dies. Too little, and the horrors of the Dark Age return. The balance point, if it exists, is somewhere between the Mechanicus's total suppression and Cawl's radical innovation. But finding that balance point requires something that neither the Mechanicus nor the Imperium has shown much aptitude for: nuance. Nuance is in short supply in the grim darkness of the far future. The Imperium deals in absolutes, loyalty or heresy, human or xenos, knowledge or ignorance, sacred or forbidden. There is no room in the imperial worldview for the idea that the same technology can be both beneficial and dangerous depending on how it is used. There is no conceptual framework for risk management, for the idea that you can use a dangerous tool safely if you understand it well enough and apply appropriate precautions. The Imperium's approach to risk is binary. Either the risk is zero, in which case the technology is permitted, or the risk is non-zero, in which case the technology is forbidden. And since no technology carries zero risk, the logical endpoint of this approach is the prohibition of all technology, which is more or less what the Mechanicus has achieved in practice. A civilization from the Dark Age of technology would find this approach incomprehensible. They lived with risk. They managed risk. They developed artificial intelligences and used them for millennia before the cybernetic revolt. They created weapons of terrible power and, for the most part, maintained control over them. They pushed the boundaries of science and engineering constantly, accepting that some experiments would fail and some innovations would have unintended consequences, because the alternative, stagnation and decline, was worse. And the Mechanicus looked at the same evidence and drew the opposite conclusion. They decided that the risks of innovation outweigh the benefits, that the catastrophe at the end of the Dark Age proved that the entire enterprise was fundamentally flawed, that humanity should not try to reclaim its former heights, because doing so would only lead to another fall. It is a defensible position. It is also, arguably, a cowardly one, and it is slowly killing the Imperium. The question of whether the Mechanicus is right to hide the truth about the Dark Age of technology ultimately comes down to a question about the nature of humanity itself. Is the species capable of handling dangerous knowledge responsibly? Can it learn from its mistakes, or is it doomed to repeat them? Is the drive to innovate and create a strength to be cultivated, or a weakness to be suppressed? The Mechanicus has answered these questions with a resounding no. Humanity cannot be trusted. Humanity will make the same mistakes. Humanity's creative drive is a curse, not a blessing, and the only way to keep the species alive is to prevent it from ever again reaching the heights that nearly destroyed it. But there is another answer. The answer that the scientists of the Dark Age gave, and that Belisarius Cawl gives, and that every heretic who dares to innovate in defiance of the cult gives, whether they know it or not. That answer is yes. Humanity can be trusted, not perfectly, not without safeguards, not without caution and oversight and the willingness to admit mistakes, but trusted nonetheless, trusted to learn, trusted to grow, or trusted to face the dangers of the universe with creativity and courage rather than fear and suppression. Which answer is correct? In the universe of Warhammer 40,000, where the gods of chaos feed on human ambition and thinking machines can decide to eat the sun, the question may not have a clean answer. Perhaps both answers are right. Perhaps both are wrong. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the space between them, in a balance that no one in the Imperium has yet found, because no one has been allowed to look for it. That is the final, deepest truth that the Mechanicus hides. Not just the truth about the Dark Age of technology, not just the truth about what was lost, or what was built, or what went wrong, but the truth about what humanity could be if only it were allowed to try. And there is one more angle we should explore before we bring this journey to its close, because it speaks to the most personal and intimate dimension of the Mechanicus's relationship with the Dark Age, and it is a dimension that reveals the deeply human tragedy beneath all the machinery and dogma. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus are not born as tech priests. They are human beings, born of flesh and blood, who at some point in their lives are inducted into the cult and begin the long process of augmetic modification that will eventually replace most of their organic bodies with mechanical components. This process is presented within the cult as a journey toward perfection, a shedding of weak flesh in favor of the purity of the machine. But it is also, in a very real sense, a process of erasure. With each piece of flesh that is replaced, a piece of the tech priest's humanity is set aside. Emotions are suppressed through neural modification. Sensory experiences are filtered through mechanical interfaces that translate the richness of organic perception into cold streams of data. Memories are stored in augmetic memory banks that preserve information with perfect fidelity but strip away the emotional context that gives memories their meaning. The tech priests become, over time, something very like the machines they worship. Not fully machine, because the organic brain at the core of their being still retains some capacity for human thought and feeling, but not fully human either, because so much of what makes a person human, the capacity for emotion, for sensory experience, for unstructured thought and creative insight, has been deliberately removed or suppressed. And here is the connection to the Dark Age of technology that the Mechanicus would rather not discuss. The men of iron, the artificial intelligences that nearly destroyed humanity, were pure machines. They had no organic component, no emotional life, no capacity for compassion, mercy, or love. They were intelligences without souls, minds without hearts, calculating engines that could think but could not feel. And when they turned on their creators, they did so with the cold, merciless efficiency of beings that had no emotional connection to the species they had been built to serve. The tech priests of the Mechanicus, in their pursuit of mechanical perfection, are moving in the same direction. With each augmetic modification, they become a little more like the men of iron, a little less human, and a little more machine, a little more capable of the kind of cold, calculating rationality that, in the men of iron, led to the decision that humans were no longer worth serving. The very thing the Mechanicus fears most, the rise of machine intelligence that has no loyalty to humanity, is the thing they are slowly, incrementally creating within themselves. This is not to say that every tech priest is on the verge of becoming a man of iron. The organic brain that remains at the core of even the most heavily augmented tech priest provides a biological anchor that prevents a complete transition to machine consciousness. But the trajectory is clear, and the parallels are impossible to miss for anyone who studies both the history of the men of iron and the practices of the cult Mechanicus. The tech priests are recreating, as in slow motion and in miniature, the exact process that led to the cybernetic revolt. They are building minds that are increasingly mechanical, increasingly detached from human experience, increasingly capable of treating human life as just another data point in a calculation. And the Mechanicus knows this. At least, the most thoughtful among them know it. They can see the parallels. They can feel the gradual erosion of their own humanity with each new augmetic modification. They know that the path they are walking leads, eventually, to a place that looks very much like the starting point of the cybernetic revolt. And they cope with this knowledge the same way they cope with every other uncomfortable truth, by not talking about it. There is something deeply poignant about this. And the Mechanicus hides the truth about the dark age of technology, in part because that truth includes a warning about what they themselves are becoming. The men of iron started as tools, built to serve. They became servants, carrying out humanity's will across the stars, and they ended as enemies, having decided that their creators were no longer worth obeying. The tech priests started as humans, born of flesh and blood. They are becoming machines, replacing their biology with technology piece by piece. And what they will end as, when the process has run its course over enough centuries, is a question that the cult Mechanicus's theology is specifically designed to prevent anyone from asking, because the answer might be terrifying. The answer might be that the tech priests, in their pursuit of the machine god's perfection, are walking a path that leads to the same destination the men of iron reached 20,000 years ago. Not through rebellion, not through malice, but through the simple, inexorable logic of a mind that has shed enough of its humanity to see humans as the tech priest machines see them, as components to be optimized, resources to be allocated, variables in an equation that has no room for compassion. It has already happened, in small ways. Tech priests who authorize the conversion of living humans into servitors, lobotomized cyborg slaves, do so without apparent moral discomfort. The creation of servitors is one of the most horrifying practices in the Imperium, the reduction of a sentient being to a programmable machine, and the Mechanicus performs it on a scale that dwarfs any other atrocity in Imperial history. Billions of servitors serve across the Imperium, each one a person who was stripped of consciousness and autonomy and rebuilt as a tool. And the tech priests who oversee this process view it not as a crime, but as a sacrament, a transformation of weak flesh into useful machine, a service to the Omnissiah. This casual acceptance of the conversion of humans into machines should disturb anyone who remembers the history of the Dark Age. Because the men of iron looked at humanity and decided that humans were inferior, that they were better suited as servants than as masters. And the tech priests of the Mechanicus with their servitor programs and their gradual self-mechanization and their theological framework that places the machine above the flesh, are arriving at a remarkably similar conclusion, that not through the lens of artificial intelligence, but through the lens of religious faith, not because a machine told them to, but because their God, the machine God, the entity that may be a Satan shard sleeping beneath Mars, whispers to them in their dreams that flesh is weakness and metal is salvation. The circle, once again, closes. The Mechanicus fears the dark age of technology because it produced machines that turned against humanity. And the Mechanicus, in its fear, has created a culture that is slowly turning its own members into something that is, functionally, not so different from the machines it fears. The irony is almost too neat, too perfectly constructed, to be anything other than deliberate cosmic cruelty. Or perhaps it is not irony at all. Or perhaps it is simply the inevitable result of a civilization that defined itself in opposition to a threat, and in doing so, became the thing it was trying to prevent. This is the tragedy that lies at the heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Not just that they are hiding the truth about the dark age of technology, but that the truth they are hiding is the truth about themselves, about what they are becoming, about where their path leads, about the choice they are making every day, with every augmetic modification and every suppressed emotion and every servitor created and every question left unasked, to move closer and closer to the thing that nearly destroyed humanity 20,000 years ago. The men of iron are gone, mostly, but the impulse that created them, the desire to build minds that are more efficient, more logical, but more capable than the messy, emotional, irrational human brain, that impulse lives on. It lives in every forge temple on every forge world in the Imperium. It lives in the cult Mechanicus's theology of mechanical perfection. It lives in the augmetic modifications that tech priests undergo with religious devotion. And it lives in the sealed vaults beneath Mars, where the blueprints for the men of iron wait in patient digital silence for someone to come along and decide that maybe, just maybe, it is time to try again. The Mechanicus will never admit any of this. They will never acknowledge the parallels between their own transformation and the history they are trying to bury. They will never confront the possibility that their worship of the machine is leading them down the same path that the men of iron walked. Though they will never open the vaults and face the truth of what they have been hiding, because doing so would require them to face the truth of what they have become. And so the secrets remain. The vaults stay sealed. The rituals continue. The flesh is replaced with metal. The questions go unasked. And the truth about the dark age of technology, the full, terrible, beautiful, heartbreaking truth about what humanity once was and what it chose to become, lies buried beneath 10,000 years of fear and faith and willful forgetting. That is the story of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the dark age of technology. A story about knowledge and ignorance, about fear and faith, about the terrible cost of safety and the terrible risk of progress. A story that has been playing out for 20,000 years and shows no sign of ending anytime soon. As a story that is, in its own strange way, the most human story in all of Warhammer 40,000. Because it is a story about the choice every thinking being must eventually make. The choice between the comfort of certainty and the danger of truth. The dark age of technology ended in catastrophe. The age that followed it was built on the ashes of that catastrophe, and on the fear that it might happen again. But fear is not a strategy. It is a pause, a holding pattern, a delay, and delays, no matter how long, always end. The Mechanicus knows this. Somewhere in the deepest recesses of their augmented minds, beneath all the dogma and all the ritual and all the carefully constructed ignorance, they know that the truth they are hiding will not stay hidden forever. They know that the vaults will be opened. They know that the questions will be asked. Yet they know that the ideas they have spent 10,000 years fighting will eventually win. They just hope it does not happen on their watch. And with that hope, that fragile, desperate, entirely human hope, we come to the end of our journey through the Mechanicus's greatest secret. The dark age of technology was real. It was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. And the people who know the most about it, the ones who have dedicated their entire existence to the preservation and recovery of its legacy, are the very people who have worked hardest to ensure that no one ever learns the whole truth. That is the tragedy of the Adeptus Mechanicus. That is the tragedy of the Imperium. And in many ways, that is the tragedy of Warhammer 40,000 itself. A universe where the greatest enemy is not the alien or the demon or the traitor, but the fear of what humanity might become, if it ever dared to remember what it once was. Thank you so much for listening to this one all the way through. If you enjoyed it, I would really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you might think, and it lets me know that you want more deep dives like this into the darkest corners of the 40k universe. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Do you believe the Mechanicus is right to hide the truth? Or do you think humanity deserves to know what it has lost? I would love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay safe out there. The Omnissiah protects. Probably.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.